So who is it then that's really behind this current push for disclosure?
There has arisen an insurgency group that have occupied extremely high positions in the Defense Department, inside the Central Intelligence Agency, inside some of the private aerospace corporations. There's 24 of them.
Wow.
Okay, and I happen to know who they are. And what they've done is they've formed an association.
Is that the first time you said that?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
This is breaking news.
He had a private conversation with President George H.W. Bush.
Yes.
And George H.W. Bush had confirmed to him that in April of 1964, that 3 UFOs had approached the tarmac at the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. And the center one descended and landed on the tarmac. And a humanoid, non-human being came out of the craft. More importantly, the method by which they actually transport from their star system to ours is through a form of remote projection. Like Ingo Swann, for example, in Penetration, talks about projecting conceptually himself up onto the surface of the moon.
Yeah, like bilocating.
And then bilocating up there. And there's some sort of a plasma type of phenomenon that occurs. This is the means by which they actually transport. That it's not just super fast. They are able to direct their consciousness. They've got some kind of what they call psionic assist that can collapse the wave function. They can focus on a particular location, and they can ramp up the phenomenon to the extent of transporting the ship bang bang like that.
What if the most massive story in human history isn't simply being hidden from you, but managed? And if that is the case, which it seems like it very well could be, the next question is, who or what is managing it? Danny Sheehan is someone who's been at the center of not just that and related questions for decades, but some of the most consequential and controversial legal efforts in the last 50 years. Before we proceed, I do want to give you a heads up. This mind meld does not exactly hold your hand. Danny just kind of locks in immediately. He summarizes a lot of the broad strokes of the disclosure conversation quickly and thoroughly, and he really just lays it out there in terms of what he sees as the current state of the topic. And I really just give him a lot of latitude, a lot of space to riff in this one, as you're going to see. And I do have to dangle something of a tease for later on in this mind meld, because we do hit some pretty novel territory. Danny shares something he says he's never said publicly before, and it raises serious questions about who could be behind this new push for disclosure. We also riff on a number of other pieces of lore that just absolutely sent me, having to do with some of my favorite nuggets: consciousness, remote viewing, and the true identity of the phenomenon. And with that, if you don't know the legendary Danny Sheehan, he's an attorney who's been involved in cases like the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, Iran-Contra, and he later became legal counsel for Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project. He's currently representing UFO whistleblowers, and he is also at the helm of the new Paradigm Institute, which seeks to, quote, compel full and responsible UAP disclosure from governments, private or public companies, and individuals, and to prepare the human family for the cultural shifts that will come with irrefutable evidence of extraterrestrial contact. Let's get into this one, but first, do like, subscribe, hype the video on YouTube. If you are listening on Apple or Spotify, subscribe, leave a review. All of the above do help and are deeply appreciated. So much love for being here, my friends. Let's commence this mind meld with the great Danny Sheehan. So, Danny, like I was just saying, I feel like this is a really auspicious, synchronistic time to have you in town and both be doing South by Southwest, because it is one of, I think, the most consequential times in UFO disclosure in recent memory as someone who's been paying attention. And of course, people on UFO Twitter will probably disagree and quibble about what's real, what's an op, what's going on. But
Sure.
From a mainstream perspective, I think the release of Age of Disclosure and this promise by Trump are two of the biggest developments I can remember seeing, and since I've been interested, at least again in a mainstream way, for all of my skeptical friends out there. But yeah, what is your assessment of where we're at, and do you think these are consequential developments?
I think that the obviously the people who've been at this for as long as I have, for 50 years, saw and it's always talked about, the December 17th, 2017 front page article by the New York Times, in which it was acknowledged by Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, not only that there was, in fact, an above top secret program actively underway in the United States Pentagon investigating UFOs as such, and that they had concluded that UFOs were real, that they were not swamp gas, they were not just mistaken flocks of birds or spotlights shining off the bottom of clouds. This was an extremely important watershed because people from a epistemological point of view, that they look to sources of authority to tell them what's real. Most people don't spend the time or have the time to investigate the dimensions of reality itself, even political reality, unless they're told by some authoritative source. And the New York Times, over time, has become one of those sources. And when the New York Times Board of Editors made this decision that they were going to go with a front page above the fold, as they refer to it, story, confirming through authoritative sources like Lou Elizondo, who was the chief of security for the Advanced Weapons Special Access Program inside the Pentagon, and Chris Mellon, who had been the assistant deputy director of the Defense Department for intelligence, both under the Clinton administration, Democrats, and W. Bush, Republican administration, telling the world through the New York Times that UFOs were real, that they were not just swamp gas and all, and in fact that the United States government was involved in a program of searching for them and trying to, quote, understand them. Now, this was a definite watershed moment. Okay, and strangely enough, from December of 2017, all the way to 2023. Like a 6-year period, there was this whole settling in of that particular insight. Now that this was real. That was a very important crossover, because up until that point, virtually every single authority inside the United States government kept insisting that UFOs weren't real. That the phenomenon was just a mistaken identity on the part of the observers. So that was an extremely important moment. It's hard to overstate how important that was. And then on July 26th of 2023, you had David Grusch come forward, and in another authoritative setting, in this case, the United States Congress, the House Oversight Committee, under oath, telling the people not only that UFOs were real, but that we were in possession of at least one of them. And what he referred to as a non-human origin extraterrestrial spacecraft. And in possession of the bodies that were recovered from the craft that had been scientifically examined and confirmed.
The famous biologics.
His famous biologics statement. But it means that they're non-human beings. Okay, that's another kind of extraordinary moment, not only because of the substantive content of it, which people had been speculating about, but to have an authoritative source who had been a high-ranking official in the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which people didn't even know what that was.
Right.
At that point, people didn't know there was such a thing, right? And he'd been a high-ranking official in the National Reconnaissance Office, which more people had heard about. But the fact that he was on the special task force that had been put together inside the Pentagon to do this investigation, okay? And that was the UAP task force, all right? And so for him coming in front of the Congress, and very importantly, to have the Congress of the United States decide that they were going to put him in front of the cameras live out to the whole world of him asserting this, took on the authority of the Congress of the United States. Okay, that's another extraordinarily important moment. Okay. So the fight went on with Lou Elizondo. Lou, another important moment that most people don't realize the importance of Lou Elizondo, because the know-nothings inside the Pentagon, responded immediately with their hair on fire, saying, "Wait a second, none of this is true. The fact is we don't know who Lou Elizondo is. Lou Elizondo has never been part of the Defense Department. We have no records of there being any such program." It was a totally bizarre thing. Susan Gao and others, inside the press office of the who either hadn't gotten the memo that things had changed or didn't care. And the bottom line is Lou got really upset about this, that they were calling him a liar publicly.
Yeah.
And here's a guy, that's got a lifelong career inside the United States military, is a very high-level counterintelligence officer, having the world told that he's a liar. So he got very upset about this. And so there's another extraordinarily important moment that happened here.
Yeah.
And it was Lou Elizondo. There was the other one, To the Stars Academy.
Yes.
There was this thing that happened, in like 2021, where all of a sudden, Tom DeLonge, kind of a cultural hero, of the big band, had put together a group of men who were quite authoritative. One of them was Lou Elizondo, and you had Chris Mellon, you had Hal Puthoff, you had Jay Stratton, you had a number of these people that were sitting with him on a nationwide, I guess they call it streaming event, saying, "Oh, here we are, and we're a group that's going to be going forward in not only investigating further the information about the UFOs, because they're all real, but we're going to be using some of the technology." Because one of the other things that was said in 2023 later by Dave Grusch is that he told the world that our Pentagon was secretly trying to reverse engineer the technology. And he said that in open session in Congress. And now this is getting into weapons stuff.
Right.
Now that's an extraordinarily important thing, to have a person of his stature in knowledge be talking about the fact that we're engaged in the development of a weapons system to utilize the technology that we've recovered from non-human origin extraterrestrial spacecraft, to examine their propulsion system and their anti-gravity. For him to be saying things like this in open session in Congress. Obviously, the House Oversight Committee had seen a copy of his proposed testimony. He had actually given them a typed version of it. So what we have here happening is the penetration into sort of the sacred areas of the Pentagon. We're talking about a weapons program being developed.
Right.
That'll usually get you shot. If you talk about something like that. So all of this was taken. Those are serious moments. And then, as I said, when Lou started being really upset over the fact that Susan Gao and some of the other people inside the Pentagon were publicly calling him a liar in asserting that they had no records of him at all, he decided he was going to file a complaint, with the Inspector General of the Defense Department. And this is the event that people didn't realize was quite as important as it was. He reached out to me.
Okay.
He called me, and I, for 20 years, had been general counsel for the Disclosure Project of Dr. Stephen Greer.
Yes.
Prior to that, in 1994, I was the legal counsel for Dr. John Mack at Harvard. Okay, and prior to that, I had been general counsel under President Carter, of him tasking the Congressional Research Service to dig out every single document that we had in the government about UFOs and about extraterrestrial intelligence that might be connected to the UFO. So I had this long history, starting when I was at Jesuit headquarters in the office in charge of their public policy positions, right, as a candidate for the Jesuit priesthood. And so that when Lou reached out to me to ask me to be his attorney in preparing this complaint that he was going to be filing with the Inspector General, what I did in conversations with Lou, it got Lou to acknowledge to me that part of his upset wasn't just that they were calling him a liar, but the fact that they were lying to Congress. And they were lying to the American people, that they had a whole program going on, a PSYOPs program directed against the civilian population of our country, which is absolutely unconstitutional and technically illegal as well. Okay. And so he decided that he would file a more expansive complaint. That it wasn't just, they're picking on me and retaliating against me for being a whistleblower. What he did, I pointed out to him that technically it didn't qualify because he was no longer employed because he resigned. Okay, and once you've resigned, you don't have any standing to bring a complaint as retaliation inside the statute. But we went forward with it, and it was an extraordinary experience. We went together into the big headquarters of the Inspector Generals, right next door to the Pentagon there, and sat down with the Inspector General himself. And you could tell that the Inspector General had not been briefed in on this program.
He didn't know what he was in for.
No, didn't know what was coming. But he just thought that, that this guy was whining about it and was saying things that, as far as the Inspector General knew, weren't true. And so Lou started putting on a seminar for the Inspector General. Let me tell you what I know, he said, and let me tell you how I know. And he started laying this out for him. And I was sitting there at his side, with the with the Inspector General kind of going, "Who's this guy?" And then I would chime in saying, not only that, but here's another person that I know about that you should talk to who can confirm what Lou is saying. I'm here to confirm, and I told him who I was. And he was kind of astonished. The legal counsel, general counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters, would be there confirming that this was actually true. And it started to dawn on the Inspector General that he was now getting to discover something was true that he had not been told about. Right? And so he started sending out to get other people from his staff to come into the meeting. It was quite an extraordinary experience. And they started filing in and coming in, and it started just building up. And then a full bird colonel from the United States Air Force comes in and sits at the end of the table. And he hadn't been told about this. And so you could tell that there began to develop in the course of the meeting this sense of being offended. Not by Lou, but by the people that were lying to them, right?
Friends, I have been doubling down on content over in the YouTube members section and on Patreon. So if you desire further novelty, point your qualia in said directions. If you do join up at patreon.com/Third Eye Drops, you will also get access to a patron-only Discord and other rewards. Or if you just want that content, flip over to the member section here on YouTube and become an initiate. So much love for supporting, and back to the mind meld.
And they started filing in and coming in, and it started just building up. And then a full bird colonel from the United States Air Force comes in and sits at the end of the table, and he hadn't been told about this. And so you could tell that there began to develop in the course of the meeting this sense of being offended. Not by Lou, but by the people that were lying to them, right? And so we and one of the things that Lou said with some conversation with me is that to demand that the Inspector General insist that the Defense Department amend their policies so that they actually have a written protocol authorizing people in the military services, which they had jurisdiction over, to come forward and to share information with Congress about the UFO phenomenon. And they did it. They actually did it. They responded to Lou Elizondo to actually issue a directive ordering the people that if they had information about this to come forward. And then the Congress followed up on it, dropped the ball on it, but they followed up on it by saying, let's set up a special office inside the Defense Department with the intelligence agency. So the Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense were charged with creating an office to which people could come inside the military and intelligence community and deliver their information. And that was the Advanced Aerospace, AARO, the AARO office. The Advanced Aeronautic or Anomaly, Advanced Anomaly Resolution Office.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
And so
which has become quite controversial because some,
rightly so. Yeah, because it was still under the control of the intelligence community, i.e., the CIA.
Yes.
And the Defense Department, the very people who've been lying about this for 80 years. And I was one of the initial people that was contacted by AARO, say, okay, get on in here and tell us what you know.
Right.
And it was Sean Kirkpatrick himself that interviewed me. Right? It wasn't just some lowly staff person.
Yeah.
And so I sat right there and told Sean, I said, look, here are the people. You talk to them, get them, and they'll tell you. They've got firsthand knowledge about this, and including people that were part of the crash retrieval program, whom I had interviewed when I was legal counsel for the Disclosure Project, Stephen Greer, right? And so I had all this information, and so I started pouring it on him. And I got to be very suspicious when I saw him lay his pen down and stop taking notes because it wasn't recorded. They weren't recording the information. They were scribbling down notes.
Wow.
And he just lays his pen down and stopped taking notes. And I knew what that was because I'd been through it before when I was legal counsel in the Iran-Contra case. And FBI people that had been sent over to me by Lawrence Walsh, the special prosecutor got appointed. When I started telling them inside stuff about what was going on, the FBI guy, this guy O'Corn, his name was, just laid his pen down just like that. And I knew what that meant. It was they didn't want any record of this established. Okay. And then Sean Kirkpatrick lied publicly. And talked to Senator Gillibrand and under oath, saying they'd received no information of any kind suggesting that there was any kind of crash retrieval program. Right. We'd given him the names and contact information. And he'd done nothing. So we knew right away that was a bogus operation and began saying so. Now, I had the great advantage of the fact that I had refused to get a security clearance. They kept saying, oh, look, if you're going to be representing Lou Elizondo and be helping him prepare this, that he can't tell you things that are classified unless you get a security clearance. But if I'd gotten a security clearance, then anything and everything that I had learned over, by that time, a 45-year period of working in this whole area, I wouldn't have been able to say it publicly.
You're right.
Because they would pretend that it came because I had the clearance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I refused.
Yeah. So that's a really good summary. Maybe a fast-paced summary for people who aren't familiar with all of this on sort of the major bullet points of this latest wave of disclosure.
And this all preceded. All preceded the documentary.
Right.
Yeah, and it preceded
Trump's
pretended assertion he was going to disclose this stuff.
Yes.
It was all utter bullshit. Anybody who has a political IQ above room temperature knows Trump, because Trump had made the same promise to disclose all the Epstein files.
Right.
And the minute he said, if you elect me for a second term, that's the first thing I'll do. And he actually choreographed the people from the Freedom Caucus, these 8 very conservative members of the House, to stand on the steps of the Congress with these pretended folders. Here's the files. Let's get all these out.
And then they turn around and say, oh, there are no files.
That's right.
And it's only upon severe public demand and outcry that they produce anything.
Well, and the fact that the members of Congress started getting the heat because the people were really pissed off over the fact that Trump had betrayed them. I mean, the more conservative people in the country had placed confidence in him personally, right? Which he, of course, demanded. And then when he wouldn't do it and started pushing back, they were going to their Congress people saying, okay, we're PO'd over what he's doing. We want you to go ahead and do something. So the Congress people started going, well, look, we hadn't had any motive of our own to find out about this because who knows what's in there, and who we know that might be in those files. So they hadn't been motivated to do anything until people really started, getting in the streets with, torches and pitchforks. So then what they did is they actually passed, or they had a bill for the transparency on the Epstein files. They had the Epstein Files Transparency Act, to be clear. Okay. And then Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, at the behest of Trump, refused to put it on the floor for a vote.
Right.
And so what the Congress people did in the House, they actually went to the point of getting a discharge petition prepared. And that if you can get a majority of the members of the 435 members of Congress to demand that a bill be put on the floor, despite the sacred fact that the Speaker of the House didn't want it to go to the floor.
Yeah.
And that's a long-standing procedure in the Congress. And this discharge petition is a very, very rare thing to happen. But they did it, okay? And then it went onto the floor and passed, of course. And so now there was a direct command from the Congress to the Justice Department directly, demanding that they turn the stuff over. And then Trump intervened and started instructing the Attorney General to not turn over the documents.
Yeah.
And so it was now displaying the fact that Trump was lying about this and was further betraying the people. So they got even more and more angry. And so what happened is the House of Representatives, House Oversight Committee, set up a special task force. This is another major point that they set up an actual task force of 12 people, Republicans and Democrats, is in a sense not a full subcommittee, because James Comer, who's the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, didn't give them part of his budget, didn't assign them subpoena power, didn't assign them any staff, but went through the motions, say, okay, well, we're going to have a task force on this, which is going to have jurisdiction over not only getting all of the Epstein files revealed, but all of the UFO files as well. This is an extraordinarily important point of a thing. And these are kind of things going on behind the scenes that it's helpful to get a chance to talk with you about this, that people don't know about it.
Yeah.
They've heard about this task force, but it's the one that's just lighting a fire under Trump and under the Justice Department to get at all of the Epstein files. But not only that, but it's establishing a pathway procedural pathway by means of which we can do the same stuff with regard to the UFO stuff. So that we're letting the Epstein files people all run by Anna Paulina Luna. She's got square responsibility for doing this, for getting the Epstein files out, and she's delegated Eric Burleson.
Yes.
Another member of the extremely conservative person.
Right.
Extremely conservative. But he's like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He's a Jimmy Stewart kind of character. And he just believes that the Constitution is functioning and that he's going to go right forward and get this stuff. So now we have the task force, which is extremely important from an investigatory point of view, because there's a go-to place. There's a go-to place that can be trusted. And they knew they couldn't trust AARO. So the people that had the inside information, and they've been authorized by the regulation that had been passed now by the Defense Department to come forward and give information to Congress, but they knew AARO wasn't the place to do it because it would just go there and die. And so what they did is they began to go to the Senate Intelligence Committee inside the Congress and deliver firsthand information. So 40 of the people from inside the UFO secret program, reverse engineering program, started coming forward to the Senate Intelligence Committee staff and giving them all the information. So now the Senate has it. And of course, then the thing that was so extraordinarily important, I keep saying one thing, is the United States Senate passed a 64-page bill, ordering them, commanding all of the 6 U.S. military services, all 18 of the United States intelligence agencies, all 32 of the United States Defense Department agencies and departments, and all of the private aerospace corporations that had ever been put into possession of any information by our government about these programs, that they were commanded to gather together every single piece of information they'd ever had about the UFO issue and extraterrestrial intelligence and non-intelligence sources that may be responsible for the phenomenon, and gave them 300 days from the passage of the statute, 300 days to get it all put together and turn it over immediately to the National Archives. But then the Senate bill went to the House for approval. The Senate. Well, also one of the things that they did in the Senate bill was they said they commanded the president to appoint a 9-person review board. An independently appointed review board to review all of that information and decide what's to be disclosed to the public.
Yeah.
Right? Including another major milestone, including everything older than 25 years.
Okay.
Okay, this is another one of those little buried things.
So theoretically, they're supposed to disclose whatever they can disclose now currently, and anything over 25 years old, they're supposed to just let it out completely.
Just bang it out.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that was in the House agreed to. They didn't agree to have the committee, but they did order them to gather all the stuff together and to get it prepared, put it into a digital format with a searchable index. Okay, and have it done at 300 days. But then here was the problem. It went over to the House, and the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Turner, who happened to come from the Congressional or be in charge of the Congressional District where the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is, where a lot of the reverse engineering was going on. And so, he's got selfies taken of him, with the leadership at Wright-Patterson and with the private aerospace corporations.
Yeah.
They're doing it, like Renaissance. And so the bottom line is that the House changed the language at the very end, saying you have to do all that. You have to gather identify it, gather it all together, get it into the format, and then deliver it to the National Archives as soon as possible.
And this was supposed to be in like October 2024, right?
October of 2024.
Yeah.
They had 300 days, but they said that then you have to turn it over as soon as possible. And when a lawyer sees language like that, your hair catches on fire because you say, "Wait a second, as soon as possible." My mother's horse died. I had a hangnail. I wasn't feeling good that day, and I didn't come to the office. That kind of bullshit, actually.
For sure.
So that what happened is the people on the executive branch didn't do anything. They didn't try to gather the stuff together. They didn't try to identify it. They didn't do anything. Okay, so the bottom line is all of that. We were kind of churning water there for a while, and I knew because I was Lou's attorney, right? I knew that Lou was working with Jay Stratton to put together this documentary film.
Yes,
and they were going to be getting 34 of the guys that all knew about the program to all come forward together. And they were going to do this. And Dan Herrera, Lou introduced me to him, and I got to know him. And they put the thing together, and then they told what they told in that documentary film. Okay, and then because of that, people all around the country were going, "Holy mackerel! Look at these guys! Look who they are, and look what they're saying," including another. There's a whole lot of important stuff that was said, but one moment in there. Eric Davis.
Yes.
Eric Davis, who was a major engineer overseeing.
Weirdly, I just had dinner with him in a small group a couple nights ago.
The reverse engineering of this. He told the people directly that he had a private conversation with President George H.W. Bush.
Yes.
And George H.W. Bush had confirmed to him that in April of 1964, April 26th of 1964, that 3 UFOs had approached the tarmac at the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico and hovered over the tarmac. And the center one descended and landed on the tarmac. And a humanoid non-human being.
Yeah.
Almost 6 feet tall, big head, big eyes, long arms, the whole 9 yards.
I thought he described him as almost like a Nordic looking.
Well,
being.
it's actually tall white.
Yes.
The tall whites are different than the Nordics.
Yes. Okay.
We can touch on that.
Sure.
But that's clearly kind of tall white.
Yeah.
Came out of the craft in some kind of a tight-fitting uniform and was met on the tarmac by 2 high-ranking United States Air Force officials in uniform and 2 private civilians, or government civilians, actually, who we assume are CIA people.
Yeah.
Right? And then I knew what happened after that because Colonel Edgar Mitchell had told me about this before.
Yeah.
Right? That they went into a hangar right nearby on the tarmac, and the 4 guys and the ET guy, and communicated telepathically for some significant amount of time. And then they all came out, and the being got back into his craft. It ascended back up. The other 2 craft had been hovering over the tarmac at the Holloman Air Force Base for that entire period of time. And then they went and shot off like that. Okay. And now Eric Davis says this on November 21st of 2025 in the Age of Disclosure. Now, that's an extraordinary milestone.
Yes.
To be actually talking about a face-to-face contact with a living extraterrestrial being, and high-ranking officials of the United States Air Force and the CIA having direct face-to-face communication with him. That's a huge milestone.
It is.
Over and above the other general effect of the entire documentary itself.
Yeah.
That particular piece of information, because I knew from 50 years in the field, that's new.
Yeah.
That's a new thing that just happened there.
Yeah.
Okay? And now we've got President Trump. Well, what happened is, there was this event that took place on the 14th of February with former President Obama.
Right. He's in an interview.
He's being interviewed, and he was asked, well, what was the very first thing you did once you were inaugurated? What was the first thing you wanted to find out about? He said, I wanted to find out about the aliens.
Are aliens real?
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in, what is it?
Area 51?
Area 51. There's no underground facility unless there's this enormous conspiracy, and they hid it from the President of the United States.
What was the first question you wanted answered when you became president?
Where are the aliens?
Where are the aliens?
And he said it just like that. And then he said, do you think the aliens are real? He said, oh, yes, the aliens are real.
Yeah.
And he says it. Okay, so bango.
Right.
New York Times covers it, Washington Post covers it, and all the people start talking about it.
Yeah.
And on the 19th, Trump says, well, because of the widespread popular interest in this particular subject, what I'm going to do, some undesignated time in the future, I am going to be contacting the Secretary of Defense and the heads of the other executive branch agencies, and I'm going to direct them to begin the process of identifying the documents that all relate to UFOs and extraterrestrial life and intelligence for potential release.
Yes.
Okay. Now that's not ordering them to release, and he hasn't even issued the executive order. And when Pete Hegseth heard about it as the Secretary of Defense, he said, well, I've never heard about this. He said, up until even hearing him say that publicly, this issue wasn't even on my bingo card.
Right.
That was what he said,
Yeah.
which means they hadn't done squat.
Of course.
In the face of a direct order from the Congress of the United States, both House and Senate, ordering them to go through this whole process of identifying all the documents, codifying them, putting them into this kind of digital format, and preparing to turn it over to the National Archives. But they hadn't done anything, and he admitted it publicly. Okay, so that everybody's all excited about, the President of the United States is getting ready to order. I wouldn't hold my breath on that.
Right.
But the bottom line is that he's just responding to the building citizen pressure. So what we've done, myself as the attorney for Lou Elizondo, that we put together a 501c3 organization called the New Paradigm Institute.
Yeah.
And and we've organized this thing called Citizens for Disclosure, and we've organized people in 35 states now. We have they're not chapters officially, but they're groups, okay? And we're going to get it done in all 50 states probably by around Easter, okay? And then we're going into all 435 of the congressional districts. And what we're demanding that the people insist that all the candidates for all in both political parties, those who are incumbents and those who are people that are trying to get the seat, all of them be required to sign a pledge card saying that if they're elected, they will in fact give full support to having a bill passed, basically to have Congress itself take over the process and not wait for the president to do it. But the very first step that they would take is they would pass a statute, which Anna Polina Luna is drafting right now. Wow. Isn't a tough one, but it's a direct order to the president to issue the executive order that he's promised he was going to do sometime in the future. Okay. This is a direct command from the United States Congress to the President of the United States to perform the duty, an administrative duty. And if he doesn't do it, they can bring a legal cause of action in federal court seeking a declaratory judgment in a specific performance mandate that he's to perform his administrative duty, that he has no discretion in this. Okay, so
doesn't that feel like a fox guarding the henhouse kind of thing to you, with all these Republicans in Congress being the ones who are supposed to be holding the president accountable?
Well, there's no doubt about that. The challenge is that our democratic system has got that structure in place.
Right.
And so as an attorney, what you have to do is you have to know what the actual structure is that you've got. And you've got to do everything you can to exhaust your administrative remedies. That's what we're engaged. That's what the New Paradigm Institute is doing right now. And the citizens movement is doing it in coordination with other groups. We've got the Sol Foundation, which is, with Gary Nolan and stuff over at Stanford. We've got the UAP Disclosure Fund. We've got several of the other MUFON.
Yeah.
MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, has been around since, DIRT. And they've been working on this thing for decades.
Yeah.
Okay? So all of us are working together to put pressure on in the New Paradigm Institute, because it's basically run by lawyers.
Yeah.
That knows enough to get it down onto the grassroots level and get the people trained up so we can give them all the information. We put together the technology for being able to respond to them, be able to deliver materials to them, and help instruct them on how to do all of this.
Right.
And that's what we're doing right now. And so this is part of the pressure that was referred to by Trump when he said, in light of the widespread public interest in this subject, well, he doesn't give a shit about widespread public interest. What they're concerned about is major pressure, threatening to throw people out of office if they don't do it, because that's their job.
And also it seems like he just didn't want Obama to steal his thunder in a way from that interview. He seemed like, oh, well, you're going to say that. Well, I'm going to come out and I'll be the one to do more. And that's one of the things that, even though, of course, I think anybody, again, with, what did you say, an IQ above room temperature?
Political IQ.
No, or even an IQ.
IQ, period.
I think everybody would question Trump's motivations, right? But the one thing I would not question is that if he has an opportunity to elevate his own legacy and elevate his own ego through disclosure, that also would be a major consideration toward maybe him really meaning it, at least as far as it could bolster his own legacy.
Except for what might happen to him.
Very true. And do you think
if he tried to do that?
That's a good point, is that if you believe what's put forth in the narrative, portrayed in Age of Disclosure, one of the things seems to be that this shadowy group, that they call the Legacy Program, even though all of us from the outside looking in that are interested in this topic, we're like, well, what the hell is this? It's some nebulous consortium of military-industrial complex entities and intelligence agencies. But if they're so strong, where's this big counter push? Where's this big counter narrative? Because it seems like the disclosure narrative really is taking over. So knowing what you know, how real and how organized do you think this legacy program is, and who do you think they really are, and what is their main tactic for fighting this?
It's actually a like 4-tiered operation going on.
Okay,
you have the progeny of the original Majestic group or whatever they call it, but it's MJ-12 because there's tons of documents.
So you think that's real?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
It's not that they haven't been salted with some bogus documents that have been put in there as a counterintelligence method to try to discredit the documents as a whole. But it's very clear that almost immediately after the July 1947 crash of the Roswell UFO, that Truman convened a group of private and official people, some of them. They put together these 12 people. We've got the names of them. You know, I've got them here. I carry them around with me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he appointed them to take charge of this whole issue. And to keep it secret, and to try to figure out, what advantage we could gain as a nation state by having access to this debris and technology, right? And what the program was is that they were to keep it secret, but they were given, ex officio authority to give directives to actual military people and intelligence people. And the Central Intelligence Agency became a major part of this. They have a thing called the Operations Directorate inside the Central Intelligence Agency. That's the action arm, kinetic projects, they call them. And they became part of this. In fact, the first military commander of the Central Intelligence Agency was a member of this. Okay, their job was to keep it secret, to try to figure out how to give directives to different parts of the United States government executive branch structures to take advantage of this technology, and not only that, but to go get more of them. To go get some more of the craft that were functional, not a crash debris, but one that's whole and it's intact and is operational. And so that's what they were overseeing. But they were utilizing the authority that the president had given them off the record, completely classified, to direct activities on the part of the Central Intelligence Agency and the military to go recover craft, to bring down craft, to develop some sort of a weapon system by means of which they could disable the craft and force them to land and seize them, which is what they were doing. And that as they grew older and older, but from 1947 on, you figure these guys are, 55, 60-year-old guys, most of them. And so that, in another 20 years, from 1947 to 1967, they were losing their steam and energy. And so the protocol was that each of those 12 people had to personally handpick their own successor.
Okay.
So that the president wasn't involved in it anymore, that they had become a kind of semi-autonomous operation that was running. And so they would handpick their successor. And so those successors coming on around 1967 or so, right, that they end up now, this is now 2025.
Right.
So you've got guys like Bobby Ray Inman, who's one of them, who's 94 years old.
Yeah.
Right?
And fill people in on who he is.
Bobby Ray Inman was the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, also served as the head of the Central Intelligence Agency for a period of time. And then when he, quote, retired, people all said, well, I wonder what old Bobby Ray is doing. Well, what he's doing is he's on MJ-12, right?
Wow.
And so there's this whole second generation of the MJ-12 people who are now in their 90s.
So do you think this is part of this sort of unseen motivation behind disclosure too, is that a lot of those people are aging out? So people kind of know there's this opportunity with this generation literally dying off right now. There's a possibility to shake up this system and shake up this invisible hierarchy.
Yeah, because some of them have been holding on. They're making the same mistake that Ruth Bader Ginsburg made at the Supreme Court justice. She was getting 90 years old, but she was feeling chipper and sharp, and so she wouldn't stand down. So Obama could appoint somebody to replace her, that would be more progressive and more supportive of constitutional rights, et cetera. And she just hung on and died with her boots on, or with her robe on in that case, and so Trump gets to replace her. right? And so the bottom line is they're making that same mistake inside the MJ12 group. Okay, so what's happened now is there has arisen an insurgency group, which isn't, I'm not talking about Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon and Jay Stra. I'm talking about another group of people that have occupied extremely high positions in the Defense Department, inside the Central Intelligence Agency, inside some of the private aerospace corporations, and inside the military services, and I've got their names too here.
Wow.
Right here.
Are those names private, or can those names
They're not
be
public at all.
Okay.
They're not public at all, but there's 24 of them.
Wow.
Okay, and I happen to know who they are. Okay, and what they've done is they've formed an association, and they're working to try to drag the program back into the government.
And what's their motivation?
Their motivation is to tap off some of this pressure, to figure out how much information they can make public and kind of allay the demand on the part of the citizenry to get all the information and to get it right away, right? Because the regular citizens are just fed up with this, right? And that they've lost their confidence in the governing structures. And so that they aren't willing to just sit back and let them handle the program anymore. And so what's happening is they're saying, look, we've got to do something here. We've got to release some kind of information here. And so what they have done is they've started giving the green light, this group, not the MJ12 group, but this group, the association, let's call it.
Okay.
I know what their real name is, but that they are.
That has to be private too. That has to be secret.
No, I'm having to have these discussions with Eric Burleson and the people to decide what they're going to do about this. Because what I'm trying to do is
so he must be part of that.
He's got. We need to have Congress be made part of this.
Okay, so they're not currently part of it.
No.
Okay.
No. That they still think they're dealing with some amorphous group of people that they can't get the names of, right? And Lou is telling them, and Jake and Jay and the other people, we can't tell you who they are. For example, Eric Burleson asked the question in November of 2023. November 13th, when Lou Elizondo appeared before the House Oversight Committee, and Eric Burleson, pursuant to my prodding, said, okay, Mr. Elizondo, said, you and I have security clearances. If we both got into a skiff, would you be able to provide to me, as a skeptic, definitive proof, A, that we are in possession of at least one or more non-human extraterrestrial spacecraft, and the bodies of beings from the craft who have been established by DNA testing stuff to be non-human? And could you provide that for me? And Lou said, no. It's not that I don't know it, but I can't tell you because I'm not authorized to tell you that, which by implicit, two things. One is, he had been authorized to tell them the other stuff that he was telling them, right? But secondly, he had been told not to tell them anything more. And the question is, by whom? Right? And when they were asked that, AOC asked the question. Other people said, who are these people? Right. Well, we can't tell you who they are.
Yeah. Because a skeptic could say, okay, if we're never going to learn who this association is,
you are going to very, very soon.
Okay. Yeah. But people within, and a lot of these people who I think there's a certain there's a lot. I don't want to typecast UFO Twitter and people who are interested in this topic, but of course you have people of various depths, right? Maybe some of these people just saw Age of Disclosure and this is all new for them, and then you have more old school people who have been watching this for decades. And I think those kinds of people are going to be knee-jerk skeptical of anybody coming out of the military-industrial complex to begin with,
because they don't know any better.
And then, but I think you and I both, you're sort of like a countercultural guy, right? I mean, you fought against the government for so much of your career, but yet you do seem to trust a lot of these whistleblowers coming out. And though a lot of the public, or at least people who are interested in this, in the UFO disclosure discourse, have become, I would say, increasingly wary of a lot of these mainstream whistleblowers and seem to trust their credibility less and less.
Yeah.
But it seems like what you know leads you to still largely trust what they're doing and trust that they have at least their heart going toward the right direction.
What it is I have, I think, a more sophisticated and tutored understanding of what the dynamic really is. And so that this group, Lou, everybody recognizes Lou, and Chris Mellon, and Jay Stratton, and Eric, and Hal Putoff, and et cetera, that people can tell something's not quite right there. That they aren't coming clean, but the fact of the matter is they know that they're releasing some information. And as a matter of law, if federal rules of civil procedure, when someone makes a public declaration which is contrary to their own interests, that has a higher level of credibility. So when you have these guys coming forward saying, here's the program, I was involved in the program, UFOs are real, that's contrary to what their previous interests have been in keeping it secret. And so therefore you can start to suggest that has some high level of credibility. Now, I was in a position as Lou's attorney to get to meet everybody. And to be able to, in a sense, vet them, talk to them, and discuss the stuff with them, and probe the barriers where they were, and then realize that they were getting authorization from somewhere, which 95% of the people can't quite tell what's going on there, right? But I could tell that there was somebody giving them the authority to do this. And the question is, who was it? And it turns out that it's, in my opinion, it's not really the MJ-12 people. It's this other group. It's this association that is trying to sort of drag the program back into the official constitutional structures and military and intelligence structures, rather than have this kind of rump group that was appointed originally by President Truman, kind of in the immediate aftermath of the shocking discovery of this craft, right? And then the hand-picked successors, who are not authorized by Congress, aren't sanctioned by Congress.
Right.
So what the association is trying to do is that, because they've all come through the government, and they've come out of these private aerospace corporations as well. I mean, you get people like the chief of intelligence for the MITRE Corporation. Is one of them, But you also have the former director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Okay. You also have the former commander of the United States Air Force Department of Materiel, but they're retired. So they're retired. All of them, every single one of them are all retired now. But because they've got the Rolodex, and they've got all the credibility, they've got all the knowledge about this. What they've done is they've assembled themselves into this association, so that it's got kind of a juridical structure to it, and chain of authority in it.
So those people you just named are part of the association? Yes. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Is that the first time you said that?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, damn, this is breaking news. Speaking of breaking news, you just meant, I want to go back to this, but you also just mentioned, who in the Air Force was it?
The director of Air Force Materiel.
So speaking of high-ranking Air Force people, as I'm sure you're well aware, Major General McCasland also just kind of fell off the face of the earth.
He has.
I'm sure that's not the first time his name has come across your knowledge.
No.
And
I've known
second
about him
of
for a
all,
long time.
What did you think when you heard about that?
Well, the first thing is I was absolutely astonished that he didn't have security.
Right.
I mean, what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
We got a guy who was the commander, basically, of all of the waived, unacknowledged special access programs, weapons development programs in the United States Pentagon, and the guy who was in charge of the laboratory, the Air Force laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and so he's been in charge of all the stuff. He's been overseeing the reverse engineering program and the development of weapons systems in the United States Air Force. This guy is an absolute goldmine of information. It's just, I was just thunderstruck by the fact that he didn't have security, even though he's only 68 years old.
Right.
But in the week before he disappeared, he just got through doing a 60-mile bicycle marathon.
Really?
He's got no symptoms at all of dementia. He's healthy as a horse, and all of a sudden he just disappears without his wallet, without his wristwatch, without any credit cards, without any note left or anything.
Wow.
And he's gone. I mean, it's like bingo. And so you say to yourself, what are the range of possibilities there? Now, that's part of how I run investigations. I was extremely privileged. I got to have not only constitutional law from Lawrence Tribe at Harvard University, but people don't understand. He is a just a little bit of Lawrence Tribe. Lawrence Tribe was a summa cum laude mathematics graduate.
Oh, really?
From Harvard College, right? And then went and got his PhD at Harvard in mathematics, summa cum laude.
Wow.
Right? At the age of 26 years old, he was the director of the United States Bureau of Statistics.
Wow.
Right?
So multidisciplinary super genius.
Totally. And then he got bored by that after a couple of years and said he's going to go to Harvard Law School. And he goes to Harvard Law School, becomes the captain of the varsity debating team for Harvard, which is like
Crazy.
a football team, of discipline and schedule and stuff, and still ends up number 2 in his class at Harvard Law School. Okay. And so he goes and clerks for Justice Traynor at the California State Supreme Court, writing some extraordinary opinions for Justice Traynor, then comes back to serve as law clerk at the United States Supreme Court. And he becomes the law clerk there for Justice Hugo Black. I mean, that rings bells in the legal field because that's holy shit, Hugo Black. And then is taken to be for a second term as a law clerk for Justice Harlan. I mean, these are two of the giants of the Supreme Court history, right? And he's, as far as anybody knows, the only person who's ever been clerking for 2 different justices sequentially, right? And then comes to Harvard Law School. Okay, I happen to have been in the very first class he ever taught, which was a class on evidence, of teaching people how to evaluate evidence. And he started going into Bayes' theorem and probability projections and decision tree analysis and the whole 9 yards. And so I'm the one that stood up in the class in his first class after about the, 4th or 5th session. And I said, excuse me, I said, Professor Tribe, I said, look, all of us here are pretty smart folks. That's how we got here to Harvard Law School. He says, and I think I'm a comparatively smart person. I don't understand a fucking word that you're saying. You got to calm down here. You got to get down and get your feet on the ground. And so I established this kind of interesting relationship with Larry Tribe right on early on. And I became the co-founder with Mark Green of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review, with Larry Tribe as our advisor. So we put together the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review. We're the ones that initiated the case that established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. Went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Okay. And then because I had done that case, I was the one that actually had drafted that case. I ended up getting recruited by the number 1 corporate litigation law firm on Wall Street that represents NBC News. Right? That's why I was the guy that got the call from Jim Goodell at the New York Times when they got the Pentagon Papers. Okay. So that I was one of the very few people that ever got to read all 47 volumes of the Pentagon Papers, because we were in the process of trying to figure out what was going to get published, and where the lines were going to be. I was the one that got the call from Whitney North Seymour, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, at the behest of Mitchell, the Attorney General of the Nixon administration, calling me, asking us to please voluntarily stop publishing these documents.
Wow.
And he said, so I'm calling you. He said, Mr. Sheehan, he called me. He said, "Oh, Mr. Sheehan says, this is Whitney North Seymour." And I said, Whitney North Seymour. Am I supposed to know who you are? He said, "I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York." I said, "Oh, right. That Whitney North Seymour." And he was totally pissed right from the very beginning, right? I'm a first-year associate, but I happen to have gotten into the firm because of my having drafted the bill and stuff and written a lot of the briefs for the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. And I'd helped write not only the principal briefs for NBC, for Paul Pappas, the journalist that we represented, but got to help write the amicus briefs for CBS and ABC and for the New York Times and the Washington Post, so that we were drafting amicus briefs, friends of the court briefs, so that we could help pick off individual justices, so that we could get the coalition we needed to win, right? So that's how I happen to have known Jim Goodell. And so Goodell calls me on the phone and says, "Danny," he said, "look, this is Jim Goodell." And I said, "Hey, what's up?" He said, "Look, something's come up here I'd like to get a chance to come on in and talk with you about this. And I said, well, shouldn't I get Floyd Abrams, the senior associate on the First Amendment stuff? And he said, yeah, get Floyd to come in there. And I said, I'll get Gene Scheinman too, who's my the Cahill Gordon firm on Wall Street. Little inside information. They have half of their partners are Jewish, and half of their partners are Irish Catholic. And every single time there's a new partner made, two of them are made
equal.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's this extraordinarily interesting reality. Yeah. They used to laugh by say the Jewish lawyers and partners all come off the major law reviews of the major top 5 or 6 law schools, right? And the Irish partners, they'll break a bar stool on you to win a fight. So we were the number 1 corporate litigation law firm in the world at the time, and I got recruited to go there because I had done a case, right? And so the bottom line is I got right from the very beginning to get like an inside look at things that are going on. Right, and getting to read the documents and say, "Holy mackerel!" Our United States government is involved in massive drug smuggling, heroin smuggling, and actually opium smuggling out of the Golden Triangle, massive political assassination teams, all this kind of stuff going on. So I got this kind of a baptism by fire, right coming out of Harvard Law School, and so
huge reality check on what's going on. Behind the scenes.
Get the deep background on what's happening, and then got recruited out of the firm by F. Lee Bailey when the Watergate burglary took place. So he reaches out to me because he'd wanted me to come to his firm right out of law school, but he wouldn't let me do trials. So I said, no, I'm going with the Cahill firm because I'm going to do trials, right? And so Bailey then ends up calling me when the Watergate burglary took place because he got contacted by James McCord, who was the CIA wiretapping specialist that was caught inside the headquarters, right? And so Lee called me and asked me to come and join his firm. So I went over to his firm to do the Watergate case and got to find out everything about what was going on in Watergate, why they were there and who'd ordered them and all the details. But when I really found out what was going on in the Watergate burglary, I said, look, I don't have anything to do with this. I'm not going to do these kind of things anymore. And so I left Bailey's firm and went and talked to John Rawls, the head of the Department of Philosophy at Harvard. And I had this long conversation, and he asked me to come on back to Harvard to do the PhD in comparative social ethics. What motivates different people, different ethical standards that people have. And that's where I got recruited at the Harvard Divinity School to go to the Jesuit headquarters as their general counsel and in the social ministry office. And that's where I was when I got contacted right after President Carter got elected. And the first thing he did is he sent for the head of the CIA to come down to Plains, Georgia, before Carter had even come to Washington. He'd been the former governor of Georgia, wasn't a Washington person, but he sent for the head of the CIA to come down. And on the 19th of November, he was elected on the 4th of November of 1976. On the 19th of November, he has George H.W. Bush, who's the head of the CIA at the time, had been selected by Gerald Ford to come in to take over the CIA because they were being investigated by the Church Committee, right? Yeah. And so George H.W. Bush
brought a lot of crazy things forward.
That's right. It goes down to Georgia and tells the president he's not going to tell him about the UFO issue because he doesn't have any need to know. President Carter, rather than take on the CIA, smart, he goes to the chairman, Democratic chairman of the House Science and Technology Committee, and has them task the Congressional Research Service to do a major study and investigation to find out what kind of documentation we've got anywhere in the government, about UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence. So that's how I got contacted over the Jesuit headquarters by Dr. Marcia Smith, who's the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service, and asked me to come to lunch. And I have lunch with her, and she asked me if I'll become general counsel for the major investigation, mainly because she wanted me to get at the Vatican archives.
Yes. This is setting the stage for some of the things I really wanted to talk to you about
Sure.
is like, this interesting overlap between the Vatican and the UFO phenomenon and how they seem to have this enduring interest throughout the ages in what's going on there.
Sure.
But I'm also curious too, how did Carter get wind of us having knowledge about UFOs and programs if he couldn't get briefed on it?
Because he's seen one.
President
President Carter, when he was governor of Georgia, he was at a Lions Club meeting outside of Atlanta, and the guys that were there went out to have a cigarette break, and he goes out with them, even though he wasn't smoking. And they were out there on the veranda at this Lions Club meeting, and a UFO came.
Wow.
And it was like treetop level. And we're not talking about, dancing lights in the sky somewhere. We're talking about treetop level, the length of a football field away. And they saw it right there. So he knew positively that it was real. And so the first thing that he did when he got in, he said, just like Obama.
It's
First
incredible,
thing he did says, tell me about the aliens. Give me the stuff on the UFOs.
You have to imagine that pretty much everybody who gets into office has that question, right? And yet nobody has ever revealed anything of substance. And like, why do you think that is? And also I want to hear the story about how you eventually became convinced that there's a there when it comes to this phenomenon too, because we've kind of jumped right in from this POV of like, it's a foregone conclusion in your mind that all of this is real. But there must have been a bit of an intellectual journey there for you, I'm assuming.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I'd always been totally convinced that the UFOs were real, because I was always totally convinced that there were extraterrestrial life. I said, even as soon as when I was like 7 years old, when I really found out what stars were, I realized the stars are suns of another solar system,
right?
Just like us. So they must have planets orbiting around them, and some of them have to have beings on them. So I'd always understood that to be true. So I decided that I was going to be an astronomer. When I was 7 years old, I started investigating. And then I realized that to be an astronomer, you had to really do a lot of math.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I didn't do well in math, but I didn't want to have to spend my life doing it. And so I decided I was going to become an astronaut. And I learned that they had just founded the United States Air Force Academy. It had just begun. So I said, well, that's what you do. You go to the Air Force Academy, right, and become a pilot, and you become an astronaut. So you could get to participate in this process, right, of reaching out to the stars and getting to meet the people from other planets. So I spent my whole time preparing to go to the U.S. Air Force Academy, and I ended up, by 1963, being the number one candidate for the senatorial appointment to the U.S. Air Force Academy out of New York State, right? And I went to interview Jacob Javits, the Republican senator. And I go all the way down, because I lived way up in the woods, up in northern New York, up by Lake George, right? And so I ended up go down to New York City, the first time I'd ever been there, and go down to New York City, and go into Jacob Javits' New York office, right? And he said to me, Danny, he said, why do you want to go to the Air Force Academy? And I said, well, because I want to become a pilot. I want to get to be an astronaut. And he said, oh, yes, all young boys here in 1963 all want to be an astronaut, John Glenn, going around there, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, I've always wanted to be an astronaut. He said, so why do you want to be an astronaut? And I said, because, we're living at the most important time probably in the whole history of our human family. Yeah. We're right at the brink where we're going to be going into outer space, and we're going to get to meet these other beings that come from other star systems and stuff. There was this big long pause, and he looked at me and said, you actually believe that there's other intelligent beings in these other star systems in our galaxy? And I said, well, sure. I said, so do you. I mean, you're a United States Senator. And he was completely floored by that, and he said, wait a second. He says, this is, I hadn't quite expected this kind of a conversation here.
Right.
I said, look, I got to level with you, Danny. He said, I've already given the appointment, the senatorial appointment, to the son of my principal financial funder for my campaigns. He says, that's how it really is here, Danny. He said, but look at it. He said, I'll give you the appointment to the Naval Academy. You can become a pilot in the Naval Academy. I said, well, no. I said, I'm not into boats.
Yeah.
into planes.
Yeah.
Flying. And he said, no, you can become a pilot in the Navy. I said, but I have to do all that boat stuff. I said, I want to go to the Air Force Academy. He said, well, okay. He said, He said, who's your congressman anyhow? And I said, it's Carlton King. He said, oh, I know Carlton. He says, I'll give him a call. I haven't give you his appointment. I said, look, let me tell you something. He said, after you've been at the Air Force Academy for a year or so, nobody pays any attention to who the senatorial appointments were or who the congressional appointments were. He said, so you can, and so Carlton King ended up giving his appointment to the son of the Republican mayor of Glens Falls, who was number 7 in the congressional district. Out of the 42 congressional districts in New York, he was number 7, in the district, but he got the appointment. So I said, wait a second, something's real wrong here.
Yeah,
I said, this isn't working right. Our government isn't, there's something out of tune here with the way things are going. So I said, I should have become a lawyer and help work on making the government work better to get it back in tune a little bit, and then I'll get involved in getting ready to go to outer space. But when I came out, because of the peculiar track that I took through the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review and the Pentagon Papers and all that, I realized that our government wasn't just a little out of tune.
Oh, yeah.
It was playing an entirely different song than we'd been told. And so anyway, it took longer than I was hoping. So, but all the time I remained completely convinced that there were extraterrestrial beings, and I closely followed all the UFO information, Betty and Barney Hill, and the Andreessen affair, and all the kind of stuff. So, so I had a knack for kind of remembering all of it and kind of figuring out what was going on. So when I was at Jesuit headquarters, in the late, actually December of 1976, when Marcia Smith called me, what I did when she asked if I could do this, I went to my superior, William J. Davis, Father Davis, and asked him if it would be all right for me to do this. He checked with the other people at the staff at the headquarters. They checked all with the assistant provincials for social ministry. They checked with the provincials. Okay, and so I ended up getting up the line of the Jesuit order to agree to have me become general counsel to this investigation. So when Marcia Smith said to me, kind of the same thing that people ask the question the person becomes president. So what is it you want to know? And I said, I want to see the classified portions of Project Blue Book. And she said, they're never going to give us that. And I said, well, you aren't going to get it if you don't ask. So the president's asked you to do this. Let's just ask him. And so she did. And it turns out they agreed.
Wow.
That I could get to see them. Right?
And what did you see?
What I saw is I found in the files, I found photographs of a crash retrieval.
Wow.
Going on. It wasn't any doubt whatsoever what it was. It was a full-scale UFO with a big, bulb on the top and the whole saucer shape, and it had hit in this snow-covered field. So it clearly wasn't Roswell, and plus the thing was completely intact. And it hit, and it had plowed through this whole field, and it turned up all the earth in the snowy field. You could see the big trench, and it was here stuck in the side of another embankment. It was all covered with snow, but it was stuck in the side of the embankment. And I was looking at the photographs, and I realized it was one of these overhead projectors with microfiche. Right, because they were all in these little microfiche things in these little film canisters, right? The documents, and so I looked at and the second or third of the photographs. I said, "Wait a second, there's some symbols on the base of the little bulb thing on the top, right?" And so I focused the thing, and I took out the yellow pad and I slipped it under the thing. But I've been told that I wasn't supposed to take any photographs or anything of it. So what I did is I opened up the yellow pad to the cardboard section in the back and slid it under the overhead projector, focused it so I could see the symbols, and I traced them. I traced the symbols.
You drew them. I know when you were on Chris's show.
Yeah, Chris asked me
how we can't draw them here. Well, I guess you do have a piece of paper, but
sure.
Yeah, how would you describe those symbols?
Well, I'll show you. Let me see here. I'll find some piece of paper here. I've written on both sides of almost everything. I've got my little tags in here. This is this crazy system that I have. Oh, here's one. Okay, here's what they look like. We have the I'll do it upside down. Here's the hill.
I'll
Here's the hill where it's stuck in, right? And here's the craft. It was the other way around. It was like this, right? And here's the craft. So here's the kind of bulb on the top of it, and here's the craft like this. And it's stuck in the side of this big bank like this. There was this big trench that went all the way across the field where I had gone in. And there were these Air Force personnel, you could tell. And they were standing around the thing. They were taking pictures and stuff, photographs.
So it's like a cartoonishly like exact depiction of what you would think a saucer-shaped UFO would look like, correct? Did that surprise you?
Not what you would think it looked like, what they do look like.
Okay.
Because people had seen them.
Yeah.
And they've described them in great detail. And so that, there wasn't any doubt about what it was. And what I recognized is that when I cranked up this overhead thing, I could see along the base right here, right along the base of the top of this thing, there were symbols. And they looked like this. They were like, this isn't the exact order that they were in, but they were like this.
Is this an approximation, or is this like exact?
This is an approximation.
Okay, got it.
And so I traced them literally because I put it right down there and I traced them so I would have them absolutely perfect and exactly right. And then I said, holy shit, I said, I'd better get out of here because they told me you're not supposed to take any notes. You're not supposed to take any photographs. I didn't take any notes or photographs. I just copied them.
Right.
Yeah. So I close up the little yellow pad and I get up and I put the little canister back in and I put it away. I stick the yellow pad lengthwise under my arm and just walked right out and picked up my briefcase because they made me leave the briefcase outside.
And do you know now what this crash was and where it was? No. Okay. No idea still.
I do not. All I know is that it was winter time because it was snow, and there was Air Force guys because I could tell they were Air Force guys because I was familiar with that. They had the little furry stuff around. It was winter garb Air Force guys. And one of them, actually, the guy over here, actually had a camera, a film camera, like with the two little bulbs on the top.
So presumably there's a video of this somewhere.
Well, it's a film. It'll be film, pre-video, but there were the two little canisters. So it was like some, I don't know, 50s or early 60s or something, because it was kind of an older kind of model of a camera. But that's what it was. So I ended up going back to Jesuit headquarters, and I brought the yellow pad with me. And I going to see Father Davis, right, my superior. I say, Bill, look what I've got. And I pointed it out to him. And he looked at it, and he leans over, and he slides open the drawer on his desk, and he takes out this little 8.5 by 11 manila folder with a little cover clasp on it like thing, little bronze clasp, and he hands it to me. So I unclasp it, and I slide out an 8.5 by 11 black and white photograph of a UFO in flight. And I said, wow. I said, where did you get this? He said, my sister Dodie gave it to me. And I said, well, where did Dodie get it? She said, Mike gave it to her husband, who's the chief air traffic controller at the Seattle airport in Washington State. I said, well, where did Mike get it? He said, well, his best friend gave it to him, who's a cargo pilot that flies cargo all around the Northwest and up into Alaska. And he took this photograph right out of the window of his airplane.
In Alaska?
I don't know, where, but he's all around Oregon and Washington State, that whole area is where he flies. And he said he took it out of the window of his airplane and brought it to the drugstore to get developed. That's what you had to do back then, right? And when he sees the thing, he doesn't want to get in trouble. He said he didn't want to lose his license by reporting it. And so he takes it to his best friend, who's the head of the air traffic controllers at the Seattle airport, right? And gives it to him, saying, okay, I've done that. And then Mike didn't want to get in trouble. So he takes it and gives it to his sister, or his wife, Dodie, and said, here, bring this to your brother. He's a priest.
Okay. And
whatever that means.
Yeah.
But it means a lot, as it turns out.
Expand on that. Why is the Vatican interested in UFOs? And why do they, there's other people who talk about this too, like Diana Pasulka talks about that they seem to have had this pretty sophisticated astronomical program that is directly interested in the phenomenon. And, she's gone there into the archives supposedly with this mysterious Tim Taylor figure,
Yeah.
and has studied it there to some degree. But what is the true story and true depth as far as your understanding goes in why they're interested in the phenomenon and what they know about it?
Well, I mean, the entire Catholic Church has risen up around a person, 2,000 years ago, who was displaying all kinds of these particular talents or charisms, or he could, walk on water or levitate, could telepathically communicate with people, could understand, what their thoughts were, could transform matter from one form into another, water into wine and stuff, and manifest loaves and fishes, according to their mythology, right?
Right.
Well, it turns out that Hindu sadhus and others do it too,
Right.
And Buddhist monks do it. And it turns out that there's a whole element of our human family in any given generation who have these kind of talents that can do this. And so that it wasn't just so much, what they were doing, or even so much what they were saying. It's, as they say, it's who they are. And so the question is, who are these people? What's going on here? And since the entire Catholic Christology has arisen up around a person who had these type of capabilities, when they started realizing quite early on in history that these craft were flying around, and that the reports coming in of what these beings were doing is the beings would levitate. They'd kind of float out and elevate people, reach out and touch them on the elbow, and they would come up off the ground, and they would kind of float them into the craft. And they were telepathically communicating with them.
Yeah.
And they started saying, there seems to be some kind of relationship here between these beings that are being reported in these flying craft flying around, and these kind of talents and charisms that the saints have, that are similar to those that Christ had, and so therefore we ought to keep some notes on this and record on this, and that's in that the Vatican archives became the kind of archives that, analogous to the Alexandria library.
And people have talked about how massive the Vatican archives are, but how big are they? Like, have you I've been to the
archives, and I've met with Johann X, who's the head of the archives, because I sent the letter to them, pursuant to the request of the President Carter in the Congressional Research Service, and I got permission from my superiors at the Jesuit headquarters to do it. So I wrote to the Vatican archives, explained to them in the letter what was going on, and we'd like to have me get access to them, and they wrote back and said no. I said, no. So I wrote him a second letter saying, wait a second, I guess I didn't really make myself clear here. This isn't just idle curiosity. The president is asking for these things, and we want to participate with him in helping him understand all this. And they said no again. So I later was at the archives and went at the Vatican in meeting with the Secretary of State on another matter. And so I went to see Johann. So actually, Johann came to see me. I was coming out of the Secretary of State's desk or office, and there was Johann standing in the hallway. And he said, "I'd heard that you were here." He said, "I remember, your letter." I said, "Why don't you come on down to the archives? Let's talk." So I went down. Well, what he wanted me to do, because I'd been legal counsel for the New York Times and the Pentagon Papers, he wanted me to write a letter to the editor of the New York Times, openly advocating, in my capacity as legal counsel for social ministry of the Jesuit order, wanted me to write a letter to the editor advocating that they open up the archives about Pope Pius XII.
Okay.
Is the one who had signed the Concordat with Hitler and Mussolini on the fascists, to agreeing basically not to go after the German Reich for the Jewish death camps, in exchange for which Mussolini would agree to restore the city-state status to the Vatican.
Okay.
And so Pius XII had negotiated that deal with Cardinal Vio, who was his Secretary of State. And so that's what he wanted. So I agreed to do it, and I wrote the letter, drafted the letter for him and gave it to him. And he said, "Now, what can I do for you?" And I said, "You know what you can do for me." He said, "I can't do that. Can't do that." He said, "Not yet. Not yet." And so he hasn't given me access to that yet, but I'm hoping he will.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, but if you had to guess, knowing,
Well, I don't get paid to guess.
Okay.
That's what distinguishes us. Is that there's an awful lot of guessing going on. What I do is I try to gather all the data together.
Yes.
And following the protocols taught to me by Larry Tribe, figure out what the range of probabilities are. What are the things, even to single digit possibilities, all the way up to more than 51% probabilities, and then lay them out in front of us, and then start exploring for the data that can, fix the numbers from, you don't start out with even balances all the time. And some of these hypotheticals, some of them are more probable than others right on their face. And you go through the entire analysis. Now, the additional advantage that I had is that at F. Lee Bailey's office, when I was there working on the Watergate burglary case, I realized that F. Lee Bailey's office, Bailey and Alch, they have a whole stable of professional private investigators, Moriarty and Associates, which is owned by Lee Bailey, but it's a whole 40 guys that are there, gun toters, licensed gun toters on airplanes, and the whole 9 yards. I mean, real professionals, and I had people assigned to me to help me do investigations. And so when they realized how I did investigations and got to oversee investigations, they thought it was really quite professional. Plus, they figured that I was a good guy, which they had, most of them, the careers, they've been government investigators, FBI, CIA people, a lot of CID, Criminal Investigating Division of the very military services, and so they said, "Oh, finally, we get to actually work on something that is honest." And not some covert operation or some politically motivated operation, so I got to be friends with a lot of guys, and so that I ended up maintaining these relationships. And one of them, the guy that was my chief investigator, William Johnstone Taylor, his name was, 3-tour Vietnam Marine Corps CID, right? And he knew all kinds because he'd done 3 tours. Rational people would do only one. If they had to, and so the guys would come through the crotch, as they call it, would come through Vietnam, and they'd do 1 tour, and they'd be Air Force OSI, Office of Special Investigations, Office of Naval Investigating Services, the other U.S. Army CID, Marine Corps CID, and he'd get to meet all these guys, right? And he had 3 entire tours there with these guys coming through. So they would go out of the service, and then they would go to work for, FBI, Secret Service, state police, BCIs, Bureau of Criminal Investigations, sheriff's departments, all across the country. And so Bill was smart, and he maintained contact with all of them. And he had this entire Rolodex of these guys. And so that when I would get a case, I'd call Bill Taylor. He was one of the co-founders of the former Federal Investigative Officers Association and the founder of the Florida Association of Professional Private Investigators.
Okay.
And so I had access to the guys, and I had access to how to figure out how to do investigations. And so we set up the Institute out of the Jesuit headquarters. We set up the Christic Institute as a 501c3 public interest organization, investigative agency, and litigator. And so and the Jesuit headquarters gave us an old cobbler shop that was inherited by one of their Jesuit guys, Dom Totoro, and his sister Maria, who was a mercy nun. And they couldn't own any property. So that what they did is they gave it to Jesuit headquarters, who gave it to us as the 501c3. So we had this little cobbler shop right at the bottom of Capitol Hill. So, we took they had all those little metal feet. That's your cobbler shop thing that we sold.
Oh, really?
We kept them in our office. Our law office was kind of cute. and so we set up shop as the Christic Institute, and went ahead and did major litigation and investigations out of there.
Yeah, yeah. You've led such an incredible life, and this road that you've been on has, led us to where we are now. And I don't want to derail your story because there's so many fascinating things that we could spend forever on along the way. But we do have limited time, unfortunately, where we are. I don't know what time they're going to kick us out. But we still have plenty of time. But
I don't know.
Some of the things I do want to make sure that we get to is my audience is obviously interested in this whole topic of the UFO phenomenon, but I think they're particularly interested in, as am I, is the role of consciousness and the role and what it's
psionics, the psionic stuff.
Yes, the psionic stuff, and also the sort of like spiritual implications of it, as well as the identity of what the phenomenon is in and of itself. Really, like, are we really talking about like alien beings who literally traveled from another planet? Are we talking about emissaries of higher consciousness? And what, of course it's speculation, and you said you don't get paid to guess, but it is fun to speculate about what their motivations might be and what, the true identity of these entities is behind maybe the corporeal mask of how they appear to be physically.
Sure.
So, I guess, let's start with the psionic stuff, because you have commented on that to me privately and in other shows, I think. But you really do seem to think that there is a there. And, I'm sure you're well aware of Project Stargate. I've had a couple of the Project Stargate remote viewers on the show. Sure. Paul Smith, who you may know, Lynn Buchanan. Yeah. And
I've met Ingo Swann. And the guys, so I got briefed in on the remote viewing program back in 1977.
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh, yes.
So you knew what this was going on
when I was at Jesuit headquarters.
When it was very, very classified still.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Very classified.
So why did Jesuit headquarters need to know about Stargate?
Well, it was interesting. What I don't want to go too far into detail, but what happened is I, at Jesuit headquarters, Father Bill Davis and I, in the social ministry office, I went over to see the Jesuit priest who was a congressman who chaired the House Judiciary Committee. And I said to him, "What's the story here? I'm in Washington, D.C. I've been asked to come down to the headquarters. And they've got, agriculture people have lobbyists, and the National Organization has lobbyists. They're all over the city. Why is it that the religious organizations don't have like a shop that actually engages in a collective sharing of information and stuff?" And he said, "Well, frankly," he said, there are 54 offices of different denominations that monitor legislative issues in town. But they don't trust the Catholic Church because of the bad history we have, kind of run the world.
Yeah, sure.
And so, that they all just maintain their own individual shops. And I said, well, I'd like to, get to talk to them and see if we could set up some kind of common operation. And we did. I went first to see Dave Saperstein, Rabbi Saperstein, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, got him on board. Then went to see the people at the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops, got them on board. Went to the Unitarians, got them on board, then went to the Episcopals and got them on board. And we built a thing called the Washington Interreligious Staff Council. And we set up at the National Council of Churches building. They're the Methodist building, right next door to the United States Supreme Court. Between there and the Hart Senate Office building, right across the front windows, look right out at the Capitol building. So we set up there the Washington Interreligious Staff Council. We set up 6 task forces. Right off the start, of one to disarm nuclear weapons and destroy them, to get rid of them around the world. Feeding people, getting food and stuff, environmental protection stuff, other things like. And I chaired the task force on human rights and criminal justice. And in that capacity, I was bringing in resource people, American Civil Liberties Union, the B'nai B'rith, all these other people about religious liberty and all that. And I was chairing these meetings once a month. And then this couple came in. Young couple, like early 20s, very, very well dressed, very proper, and they said they were from the Institute for Human Rights, and I was saying, Institute for Human Rights. I said, I've never heard of that. You know,
it sounds like so broad that it almost sounds made up.
Yeah. Well, it turns out it was. And they came in, and they kept asking questions about psychiatrists. You know, isn't there some kind of, we have to deal with psychiatrists? You know, they're contaminating everybody's brains and manipulating them and all. And I was saying, wait a second. I pulled them aside and I said, you guys are Scientologists, right?
Yeah.
And they went, well, no, not. I mean, not officially. We're not. And I said, look, I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I said, you know, I just wanted to know. And they said, well, yes, we are. And they said, would it be okay for us still to be a resource person on this particular issue of human rights and psychiatry and all that? Yeah. And so I said, it doesn't bother me. And then after another 2 or 3 sessions, they came back and said, you know, couldn't we become an official member of the Washington Interreligious Staff Council? Because they were trying to get recognized by the IRS as a legitimate religion, right? And so I went and talked to Jim Hamilton, who's the head of the National Council of Churches, and he said, no way. Now, that's not going to happen, you know? And so I said, that's not going to work, but you guys can stay as a resource. So we got, they were pleased that I was doing this, and I was very open with them. And then I was getting set to leave town one morning, and Father Davis, before we had cell phones and stuff. So I stopped at one of the pay booths and called the office to check, make sure everything was okay, because I was getting set to go out of town. I said, boy, am I glad you called. You know, the FBI has just chainsawed the doors off the international headquarters of the Church of Scientology here in Washington, D.C., and they've chainsawed the doors off the office in Los Angeles at the same moment. And they've come swooping in with a warrant they brought in Xerox machines, and they're Xeroxing every single document in the entire headquarters of the Church of Scientology. Wow. And they are screaming for you to come over there to help them. So I drove over there, and they have these big, you know, mass arrest vehicles and everything all around them, and they've got the place all taped off. And so I went over and found Richard, the guy who was the legal counsel for them. I said, okay, who's in charge here? Get me to who's in charge. So I found the guy, and I said, let's see the warrant, you know, and I looked at the warrant, and it's got a whole big long list of things that they were looking for. And then at the very bottom, it's got a thing that says, and any and all other evidence of any federal or state crime. An absolute general warrant. An absolute general warrant. The very thing that caused the Fourth Amendment to get put into the Constitution.
True.
And I said, whoa, I said, look at this thing. And so I took a copy of it and went to the federal courthouse, drove right over to the federal courthouse and got to see Judge Green. Said, take a read of this thing. I said, you know, they're sitting in there Xeroxing all the files and stuff for the Church of Scientology. And I said, I want an immediate injunction, emergency injunction to stop them from doing this. And he said, write it up and I'll sign it.
So legally speaking, a warrant should be within a very limited scope of exactly what they're looking for.
The very thing you're looking for. And you have to have a probable cause declaration to declare that it's more probable than not that what you're looking for is evidence and fruit of a crime. And they hadn't done any of that, you know?
Well, question...
So that's how I got there. Gotcha. I found out from them, because what happened is of course, I go back and I deliver the court order to the people. And the FBI has to unpack everything, and I put in the order. They had to return every single document, every photostat of every single document, all the fingerprints they took off the documents. I knew enough to go down the whole list of how to extract every single thing they had, right? Which is going to be helpful when we're doing the depositions of the legacy group.
True.
So we did all that. They had to put everything back, and they were really pissed, you know, the FBI guys. And so in the Church of Scientology was just ecstatic that we had done this. And then 2 weeks later, turns out the U.S. attorney issued a subpoena for the top 12 members of the Church of Scientology in New York State. And ordered them all to come into a grand jury, which they were going to go after them. They called me. I flew up to New York, or drove up to New York actually, and filed a motion to get an injunction against them on the grounds that it was violative of the First Amendment rights of a church. They couldn't do that. You know, it violated the confessional. And won and struck it down. So they were totally ecstatic.
So for people that don't know about this early link between Project Stargate and Scientology, that's something that people listening might be like, okay, why is he talking about Scientology?
Why is he talking about Scientology?
But there is a major link between all of these early figures and the Church of Scientology, at least for a period of time. So we're talking about Pat Price, we're talking about Hal Puthoff,
Ingo Swann.
Yeah, so catch people up on that.
Well, so anyway, what happened, I didn't know anything about it at that stage, but what happened is they come back to me and say that L. Ron Hubbard, head of the Church of Scientology, wants me to become his lawyer for him and his wife, Susan. And I said, look, I'm busy doing all kinds of tons of other things that I can't really probably do it. But I said, as a condition precedent, before I'd even get to go meet with Ron Hubbard, I said I'd have to be given permission to get access to every single document of the Church of Scientology anywhere in the world. Yeah. Which I figured was a total non-starter, right? Well, a week later they come back and they say, "Okay, it's done. We're going to fly you down to Florida, to the big blue cube down there that they've got down in Clearwater, Florida." So I call Bill Taylor, who's the president of the Florida Association of Professional Private Investigators, right, down there. And so Bill and I go into the headquarters. And we're in there, and they've got the guardian of the church, church guardian office, which is their security people for the entire United States there, and the international guardian for the whole international Church of Scientology. And they're there. And the head guardian for the international office says to me, so what do you want to see? And I said, well, first thing I'd want to see is my file, file you got on me. Well, the American guy goes, well, no, we don't. And I said, excuse me. I said, are you trying to tell me that you're asking me to be the lawyer for L. Ron Hubbard and you don't have a file on me? So the international guy says, go get him the file. So they will go and get the file, right? So Bill Taylor and I just sat there, sitting there waiting for him to come back. And 15, 20 minutes, just to say a word until he came back, and he brings it back. And I look all through it, and they got photographs of me in meetings and all this stuff. And so I said, okay, I just wanted to make sure that it was accurate. And so the national guy is a dead man sitting there basically from this point on. But the international guy says, okay, what do you want to see? I said, I want to see the 3 most sensitive files in the entire world that, in your judgment as the chief guardian. And he went, oh, shit. He said, and I'll wait. So you get them. And so off he goes. So we're sitting there with the dead man, for like 15 minutes, waiting, not a word. And then the guy comes back and he pushes the files over to me. And the first file that he gave to me was all the reports from Ingo Swann. That Ingo was a high-level clear, it turns out, called Tau 4. And he was one of the main remote viewers, and he was filing reports on everything that was going on inside Stargate, and all of the stuff about Pat Price and all the stuff they did, all the stuff about being, be able to go to look inside files and read files from a distance and all that. So I don't know if you're familiar with all that. Okay. So he's showing me all that stuff. And I'm going, wow, I didn't know anything about that, and this is 1977, and there it is, laying out all the activity that they're engaged in, and then the second file he showed me, well, one of the things in the first file, not only that thing where Pat Price was able to go into the building and into the office and into the files and read them, but turns out that, here comes a big one for you, that they could show Pat Price a photograph of a Russian boomer submarine and say, where is it?
And you could just
longitude, latitude, down to the minute and second, depth. Okay. And there's the report. He shows me that he did it. And it turns out that right up over the boomer submarine was a UFO.
Whoa. Okay.
Just hovering and tracking the submarine like that. So I went, whoa, that's a Hummer.
And there were pictures of this?
No,
or just the report?
Had the report.
Okay.
It had the report in it, no photographs. Okay. And I said, wow, that's pretty serious business. The capacity both to be able to read files at a distance and to, monitor their submarines. And then he said, so then he said, but there's a second file. And he gave me the second file. And I said, wow, what's this? And it turns out they took Pat Price up to a facility in central Canada, south central Canada, along the border, in this little building, a little like domed building. It looked like a little observatory, this says. And they got these big communication dishes on the top. And they have Pat Price come in and sit down in this chair, and they put this helmet on him, and they have him project a telepathic message. And then they turn the little communication dishes down on the northern peninsula of Michigan, which were there, and they focus the communication dishes there. And Pat Price is told to send out the message that you are to file your federal income tax forms for next year.
What?
In this little nowhere town post office box in West Virginia.
Okay.
And 80% of the people on the peninsula did it.
So when you say they had him do it, Stargate had him do this?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
It was a Stargate program.
So for just to take a step back, for most people who watch this channel, they know that I've been deep down the rabbit hole of Project Stargate. Like I said, I've talked to some of the remote viewers, but Pat Price is like this OG. When it comes to the OG original remote viewers, it's Pat Price and Ingo Swann. Like they're the two considered the very best. Ingo basically established all the protocols that were then taught to the Fort Meade guys, but Pat Price is sort of this
broke mold. He poured right through. Yeah.
But Pat Price is this sort of like mythical figure because he has an untimely, strange death. Where so first of all, as you pointed out, they're both almost like two-timing for the Church of Scientology at one point. Yeah. That seems to come to an end. The CIA brings Pat Price directly into their orbit.
They pull him out.
He leaves Project Stargate and then sort of goes black. And from my understanding, even to this day, when you try to, like, a lot of the documents having to do with Pat Price have not been declassified. No. And I think maybe FOIAs have been rejected about him as well.
Absolutely.
So what do you think? First of all, continue the story because I want to hear.
We'll get them. We'll get all the files.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll get all those files.
Okay.
You know, I mean, and I've seen the files.
The ones that are still classified too.
Yeah. Wow. Yes. And so that was I was kind of astonished that they've got that capacity to be able to amp up whatever that telepathic communication mechanism is that takes place, that they've got some technology. Well, it turns out that almost certainly that helmet is the helmet that they got at Roswell. That was in the craft that actually Colonel Corso talked about.
Yeah,
didn't talk much about it, but it was there, and they assumed that was the helmet by means of which they piloted the craft telepathically.
Okay, wow, that's quite a claim. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So that's the second file. Pat Price projecting his consciousness.
That's right.
To do, and they just did that to see if it would work, basically, because it seems like
all I do is know is they took him there and did it. It had the record of it, and he obviously told. I guess it must have told Ingo about it because it was a file from Ingo about what they had done.
Okay.
You know, and then they showed me the third file.
Yeah.
And I said, "That's it. I'm out. I'm not going to do it." You know.
So what was the third file?
It was their fair game file.
Okay, which is
assassination file.
Oh wow!
Of anybody who betrays the church. And I said, "Whoa, that's not going to happen." And then they're going, "Oh, come on! You know, the Catholic Church does it. You know, the CIA does it." And I said, "Like that." I said, "Hey." Yeah, but I'm not responsible for them, you know, so I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm not going to participate in that at all. And so I just got them worked out.
That's incredible. Were you worried for yourself at that point?
No.
Man.
No.
Yeah, that's spooky stuff. And yeah, and I mean, there's even part of me to this day that's reluctant to want to talk about it because they are so cutthroat in who they go after when it comes to who they consider to be their adversaries. But yeah, at some point it seems like
so do we. I mean, so does the Central Intelligence Agency.
Yes.
And not only that, but they target United States senators, you know, and members of Congress. So, I mean, you know, that they are afraid of them. The members of Congress are literally afraid of the CIA. and the off-the-shelf operations that they engage in. They've got, and they get what's coming to them because, they've been kind of completely reticent in allowing this to go on. They know that the CIA is assassinating foreign heads of state. They know that they're assassinating people and blackmailing people and torturing people and everything else. And they say, oh, well, it's kind of okay, as long as they're doing it to somebody else, but that's what you get, and that's what's happened. So they target, that we know details of the targeting of people. Frank Church, they targeted,
Yeah.
Frank Church was unseated immediately after his next election, after chairing the church committee, the Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse. They poured money into his Senate race in Idaho, and we tracked the money.
Wow.
Came right out of the Nugan Bank in Australia through 2 South African banks and into the election, and spent millions of dollars publicizing the fact that Frank Church supported the Equal Rights Amendment.
Wild.
And that he supported the regulation of automatic weapons,
Oh.
And they just pounded away at him and bounced him right out of office. Did the same thing to Dick Clark from Iowa, for Senator Dick Clark, who was opposed to their covert operations in Africa. Did it also to what's his name? Birch Bayh, out of Indiana, and bounced him out because they were opposed to certain illegal activities that the CIA was engaged in, and they turned him out of office just like that. And the senators know that.
Yeah.
Senators know that.
So you come into contact way back in the 70s with the reality of these like psychical programs.
Yes.
But so what's your next contact with the reality of these not psyops, but psy operations or psychotronic operations on the part of?
I knew that from all the information about direct contacts, because when I was legal counsel for John Mack at Harvard, when he got dragged up in front of the faculty committee, I ended up becoming legal counsel for his peer group, the Project on Extraordinary Experience Research. And they were doing lots of research on psychic power, okay? In addition to the UFO stuff that he was doing.
Okay.
That Karen Wozlowski, who was the executive director there, wanted to have other things that they were looking at, other phenomenon. And so the psi phenomenon that they'd encountered, that John had encountered in his interview of all the experiencers, knew that this was going on. And so that they had broadened out their scope from just UFO stuff to these other kind of psychic activities that people engaged in. And so I got to see a lot of that information about what they were doing in there. So I encountered that. And so that I was really interested in the fact that they had this kind of dual agenda of the UFO phenomenon and all of this other psi phenomenon of human beings being able to do these kind of extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And so right from that point, from 1994 to 2004, when John got killed, accidentally, to make it clear, but that I was kind of aware of all of that stuff that was going on. And so when I was contacted later in 2021 by Lou Elizondo to become his attorney, and I started getting to talk with Lou in some depth, he started telling me about these other aspects of the program.
Okay.
One of which was this psi phenomenon, because I would ask him, I said, look, what's the story on these craft being telepathically navigated and stuff like that? Because I've got all kinds of information about that, and I can't go into great depths about because he was extremely careful not to reveal to me anything that he wasn't authorized to reveal to me. I don't know what the dynamic is by means of which he may have been authorized, because I know he was authorized to tell things to Congress. And in the context of my representing him and going to the Inspector General and stuff, I'm not aware of whether he was authorized to tell me things that others wouldn't know about. But I was able to find out about him, because I got to meet everybody else. He introduced me to Dave Grusch. He introduced me to Carl Nell. I got to meet I got to meet virtually everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what I do is I tend to talk to them.
Right.
And try to figure out where their boundaries are.
Yeah, you're synthesizing information from lots of sources.
Yeah, and what kind of authority do they have to talk to me? Mm-hmm. Because obviously there was a reason that he called me as distinct from 10,000 other lawyers. Because I'd been the legal counsel for Stephen Greer's disclosure project for 20 years.
Yeah,
was at the time when Lou called me, and so that's. I was aware of this all the time, that this was an important dimension of this whole thing. And I knew from Corso with Paola Harris, who was very close to Philip Corso.
Okay.
I had lots and lots of details about Philip Corso, and Philip Corso, had recovered this helmet. And that never went into any private corporations. The other stuff did, the night vision goggles, the fiber optics. He was allowed to give out to other aerospace corporations. They did the Kevlar vest stuff. All that came from Roswell crash, but they didn't. The mysterious thing, the helmet didn't go anywhere, as far as I knew. He never talked about it, and I actually got to look at the one that not only his Day After Roswell book, but he wrote a book in Italian. That was barred from being distributed in the United States.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And so there's this Italian diary that he wrote that talks about the helmet and his conviction that this was the source of navigating the craft. Okay, and so that's how I got familiar with it to begin with. And as it turns out, it becomes more and more and more central to the entire phenomenon.
Yeah. So you think that was the same helmet that Pat Price used to do this operation to project his consciousness?
My assumption is that it was.
Or maybe it was derivative technology.
I'm not sure that they have been able to figure out how to do it technologically, but because I had the original.
Mm-hmm.
And so my sense was that that's what that was, so that they had been given access to it to experiment with what could be done about it.
So the other major piece of this, of course, is now, I guess this is over a year ago at this point, is you have the revelations of Jake Barber saying, not only is psi, as anybody who's into UFO lore knows, not only is that central to the way these beings seem to communicate and maybe even pilot the craft, but no, this is a real thing within the military-industrial complex and intelligence agencies and military in terms of there are psionic assets or whatever they're actually called. I get the sense that that's probably not the actual terminology. But anyway, that they're involved somehow in this legacy program effort to down and retrieve and reverse engineer, NHI technology.
Yep.
And you seem to also think that that is true.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
No, I'm positive that's true.
How are you positive?
Because I've talked to the guys that have been involved in
actual psionic asset guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did they tell you?
That it's interesting because the project started out being interested primarily in the telepathic communication with the craft. How they discovered that in the craft that in addition to the fiber optics that are in the craft, that the ET people obviously mastered the stem cell technology, and that they've got stem cell in the craft.
Oh wow!
They've got dendrites and synapses. That are actually from the brains of the ET people. They've done their stem cell project into generating synapses and dendrites into the craft so that it's semi-sentient, the craft. That accounts for this feeling that people get when they see the craft. Sometimes the thing seems to be alive in some way. And so that we know about. But more importantly, the method by which they actually transport from their star system to ours isn't linear.
That makes sense. Yeah,
it's through a form of remote projection. Like Ingo Swann, for example, in Penetration, talks about projecting conceptually himself up onto the surface of the moon.
Yeah, like bilocating.
And then bilocating up there. And there's some sort of a plasma type of phenomenon that occurs because people can see him there. He became aware of the fact that the beings that he saw on the surface of the moon became aware of the fact that he was there. So there's some kind of phenomenological thing that's happening there, right? And what it appears to be true here is that this is the means by which they actually transport. That it's not just super fast, not just super luminal. What it is that they are able to direct their consciousness to a particular location, say at the edge of our solar system, and then they've got some kind of what they call psionic assist. Is the actual program. There's some sort of technology that they have that is able to ramp up whatever the phenomenon is of the actual biologically generated phenomenon of this directed intention that can collapse the wave function, right? And that there's some sort of technological psionic assist that they can focus on a particular location and they can ramp up the phenomenon to the extent of transporting the ship bang, bang like that. And it just dematerializes and materializes almost instantaneously at the other location. And that's the one that's freaking them out totally.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean,
they're totally freaked out by that.
Yeah, if that exists, I mean, that is a godlike ability on the level of something that I mean,
astral travel.
Yeah, I mean, these are like the kinds of like ontological shock I think people don't think about when they think about, full-blown disclosure.
Right.
Is, not only is it advanced technology, advanced ships, like nuts and bolts stuff, it's really our understanding of reality itself that will be completely turned on its head.
That's right.
In that, we think this physical reality is real. We think this body is real. But what technologies like that imply is that there's a layer of reality that we're pretty much ignorant of as human beings and that we lack the capacity to interact with, at least most of us.
Except for the spiritual mythologies.
Right, yes.
Of the ability, the famous Sai Baba story. The famous Sai Baba story when Sai Baba generated this Shakti stuff, that little powder that the mystics do.
This is like a city, right? They call these cities.
It's a city.
Yeah.
And they can generate this kind of powder, and they sprinkle it places, and they sprinkle it on people. And some person that experienced that with Sai Baba said, well, that's pretty impressive, but a lot of other saints can do that. What about being able to manifest something more sophisticated? And Sai Baba said, like what? He said, how about a Swiss watch? And Sai Baba rubbed his fingers together like this and like that, and then handed him a Swiss watch. Mm-hmm. The guy was completely flabbergasted. It's a full Swiss watch. He looked at it, had serial numbers on it, hold the whole 9 yards. And he took the watch and ended up searching it out to find out where it was manufactured, and went to Switzerland to the shop where it was actually put together, and goes into the shop and says, he hands the thing to the shop owner, and he said, is this one of your watches? The guy looks at the thing and says, yes, this is it. He said, and so the guy says, well, whatever happened to it, this watch? He said, he said, this is really amazing, this watch. He said, I remember, he said, some fellow with big hair, this kind of saffron robe, came walking into the store, and he handed me these little gold cubes like this, and bought this watch. And it turns out it was at the exact same moment.
Whoa.
That he manifested it.
So the idea is he was like bilocating somehow?
Yeah.
What? Where does this story come from?
It's a Sai Baba story. It's a famous Sai Baba story.
Okay.
And so that the nexus here, which is what we're getting to, is the nexus between the capacity of our human species to be able to do these things, because it wasn't just Jesus of Nazareth that displayed these kind of capabilities. You know, the Buddha in Lao Tzu, the other major prophets. Well, they turned out to be prophets because everybody was freaked out the fact that they could do these things, and they built up this entire kind of religious community around them. But Teilhard writes about it. Teilhard de Chardin, you know, and he was implying throughout his writings that that Jesus was a mutation of where our human family is headed teleologically and biologically, that we're evolving. You know, we've come up out of hominoids in, you know, in Cro-Magnon and in Australopithecus, and, you know, we've come up to this thing where we are now at the point of Homo sapiens. And, you know, Homo sapiens are all going to be dead someday. Just like you don't find Cro-Magnon men running around now, or Australopithecus. You know, that they run their tour, and then they evolve into the next stage of our teleological unfolding, right? And so this really interesting thing happened back in 1968, in May of 1968. That I had graduated from the college, Harvard College, in '67, gone up to the law school, and I got word that Crane Brinton, who was the head of the Department of Intellectual History for Harvard University, was going to be retiring. Okay, and he'd been teaching there for like 50 years. I knew all kinds of guys that had taken various courses from him, right? And he'd been asked to speak about in his final lecture what the most important single intellectual insight was that he had encountered in his entire 50 years of this field. And so he gathered to do his final lecture, and men came from all around the world. Who had over the past 50 years taken his courses at different times, because we were the last all-male class in 1967 at Harvard out of 350 years. So they were like all men had come from all around the world to come here to be at this final lecture, and they had to move it to a bigger hall. So I was there, and he said, I've been asked to address here in my final lecture the most important single intellectual insight that I really ever encountered. He said, this is easy. He said, I believe all the greatest minds and thinkers that I've encountered have come to the common conclusion that our human species is right on the brink of moving into the next manifestation of our species. That we've come through Australopithecus and Homo erectus and Neanderthal, and none of them are around anymore. Yeah. And there'll come a point in time when none of the Homo sapiens will be around. But there's going to be the whole next phase, he said, and that the factor that is going to be, according to these insights, the factor that's going to distinguish our Homo sapien species from the next integration of our species is going to be a faculty, the development of a faculty like seeing and hearing, that have evolved up out of time, organically, out of living matter, light, like the eyeballs, responsive to the stimuli of the electromagnetic vibration of light, that have, through some sort of tropic force, have drawn up into material manifestation the eyeball into living creatures. He said that in the same way with hearing, that that the electromagnetic vibration of sound has its own particular pitch and amplitude, has drawn up into material manifestation the complex hearing mechanism. And that is going on now. There's a new faculty that is evolving in the human family that is able to directly, immediately, experientially encounter the bonding phenomenon that bonds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into one unified harmonic whole. And that by dint of this direct experience, like seeing or hearing, that you can, through this experience, you can discern immediately and experientially what form of conduct, human conduct, either individual or collective, is either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of the universe. He said, And that's why so many of you men refuse to go fight in this war.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, if you're tapped into this larger field of consciousness,
it becomes absurd.
Yeah, it becomes ridiculous.
Absolutely absurd to do the things that we do to each other. It doesn't make any sense at all if you have the adequate scope of reality. Okay, because I mean, people, almost whatever else you can say about them, they try, with the exception of Trump maybe, they try to comport their conduct with reality, because that's the referent they have. It's the referent we all have for what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
And that was what Crane Britton said. So, and I think Teilhard was aware of that.
Yeah.
And Teilhard wrote about it, and that's why he was banned.
Right.
He was banned by Ratzinger. Before he became Benedict XVI, the Pope.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Ratzinger was the head of the Doctrine of the Faith.
Wow.
And banned Teilhard from publicly speaking about it or
for
writing.
People that don't know him, he's like this Jesuit intellectual who's talking about all of these really advanced philosophical concepts like the noosphere and like the idea that the planet could be conscious, that there could be these larger consciousness structures that human beings would actually eventually evolved to tap into.
That's right.
And he was also open to things like life on other planets and things like that. Yeah.
That's Teilhard de Chardin.
Yeah.
And he was a paleontologist. He actually discovered Peking man.
Oh, interesting. So presumably
Jesuits are cool.
There's definitely some like Chardin is one of those thinkers that I definitely want to read more of because he was certainly ahead of his time, not just for a Jesuit, but for anybody.
That's right.
But presumably you'd have to think that whatever these beings or entities are, they must be more aware of this field. They must be more aware of this capacity.
Maybe 8 billion years longer.
Right. Yeah. If they even have like a conventional evolution, right? If our understanding of the universe like, comports with our understanding of time and all of that stuff. Yeah. But so does that lead you to believe that whatever these entities are, these like NHI are, that they are benevolent then? Because wouldn't they also have a better understanding of this? Or do you think that there's a mix of benevolent and malevolent?
I think that our concept of benevolence really has to do with the degree to which one is honestly comporting your conduct in harmony with the nature of the universe. That's the referent for good and bad. So that and then we attach the other adjective to it. This is benevolent. There's a benevolent person. Benefita. That they're doing good things. Yeah. And good, the difference between good and bad is whether it's harmonious to with or disharmonious to the natural order of things. It's the ultimate search for the referent, the normative referent for good and bad. It's the root of all ethics. And that's what this is about. And that's why it's so tragic, literally tragic, to have the people in the United States military and intelligence community they see this astonishing opportunity right in front of them for this extraordinary step of our whole human family out into the stars, and all they can think of is trying to make weapons out of it. It's the old Sufi saying, when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets.
Yeah. Wow. Because we are probably running in the last, I don't know, I'm going to guess like 20 or so minutes we probably have that we can be here. A couple questions I definitely want to get in is I want to go back to Pat Price because he's just such a fascinating figure to me. It's a point of personal interest, all of this stuff. Because, it seems like bar none, even Ingo, it seemed like acknowledged that he was one of the best, if not the best remote viewer.
No, Ingo, I talked to Ingo Swann at length about this. I went and met him at his apartment in New York and spent the whole day with him talking about this up on his roof. And he was perfectly clear that Pat Price was the superior of all of them.
Wow. Okay. So what do you think? What do you think happened to Pat Price? And for people that don't know, he kind of mysteriously passes away in Las Vegas while he's with Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, right? Like he's visiting them, and he's in this period of time after he left Project Stargate, and he's working directly for the CIA. And then he either has a natural heart attack and dies, or something weird happens and he's like just taken off the board by some force. Like could have been the Russians, could have been the CIA, could have been the Scientologists. Do you have an opinion on this?
I don't, because I haven't been tasked to find out.
Yeah.
And so I don't guess or speculate at things. I've been very fortunate in being given the opportunity to investigate very specific things professionally.
Yeah.
In the context, and of course that's part of why we designed the Christic Institute, is to be able to help discern by ourselves what we're going to look at.
Right.
And the Christic Institute is named by Teilhard de Chardin. He refers to this force that bonds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the universe into one unified harmonic whole. He calls that the Christic force.
Cool.
And that's with our institute, the Christic Institute. That's how that was founded out of the Jesuit headquarters in 1980 in Washington. And we functioned and did a whole bunch of different cases, including the Iran-Contra case.
Yeah.
We're the ones that generated the special prosecutor, got the people indicted in the Reagan-Bush administration. And George Bush Sr. ordered the IRS to revoke our 501c3 tax-exempt charter on the grounds that we were engaged in political activity against him and his political allies, which we weren't. What we were doing is we were investigating criminal activity and unconstitutional conduct. It just happened to include him. And so when he decided that he was going to run for re-election in 1992, after having been elected in 1988, after serving as vice president for Reagan for the 2 terms, we were publicizing all the information that we knew about him and everybody else.
Yeah.
And when he decided he was going to run for a second term, he said, well, we were interfering in a candidate for elected office. And that we were spreading information about him that was adverse to his campaign, and accused us of engaging in political activity, which is prohibited to 501c3 organizations. And so he contacted the head of the IRS and told him to yank our C3, which they did.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it was interesting that when they did it, there was a group out in California called the Romero Foundation that had been gathering money and giving money to poor people and stuff down in Latin America. And when they found out that had happened, they convened an emergency meeting of their board, and elected me to be their president and general counsel, and elected Sarah Nelson, our executive director and vice president, to be their executive director and vice president, and Father Bill Davis, who had been my superior at Jesuit headquarters, who was our secretary treasurer. They elected him to be the secretary treasurer, and then they all resigned. And sent us all their files, and that we became the Romero Institute. And the Romero Institute is the 501c3 organization that is the founder of the New Paradigm Institute.
Right. Yeah.
It's a wholly integrated auxiliary project of our Romero Institute, and we just kept on operating.
So I'm not going to ask you to guess because you've told me multiple times, but that you don't.
I can lay out the schematic.
Yes.
That you would lay out certain kind of alternative, reasonable possibilities and attach probability projections to them.
Okay. Well, let me ask you it this way: what do you think the probability is that within the near future, like let's just say the next
7 years.
Yeah, yes.
Pick that one.
That we will get some meaningful level of official disclosure in terms of, there is, we've already had people come forward and testify under oath. There is NHI. We do have craft. We do have bodies. But like that the people will have a level where they're satisfied to a degree where it will be the preponderance of evidence. The majority of people will say, okay, yes, we are not alone. There are these other beings of whatever. Even if we don't know where they're from, just an official acknowledgement with undeniable proof that there is a presence here that is non-human, that is advanced, that is doing something.
Yep.
Do you think we'll get that in a satisfactory way in that length of time?
Yeah, within 7 years we'll have it. And it's going to be a process. It's going to unfold over 7 years. That's what's going on right now. And it's happening. These kind of earth-shaking revelations that have been made, that we're in the process through the New Paradigm Institute of getting this information out into the hands of the people in a way that they can understand it and try to understand the context in which it exists. But the fact is that the process is underway right now. We are the 4 generations that are alive right now are the ones that are going through the disclosure process. And it's going to happen, and it'll be completed within 7 years. Once we get the actual official confirmation by the sitting president. And it won't be Trump. I don't believe he'll do that.
Yeah. Coming full circle here, because we mentioned I
don't think he'll do that.
Yeah.
I think what he'll try to do is try to get the information, and he's so completely self-interested and transactional. He's going to try to figure out how he can benefit from it before he's just going to give it away to everybody else, and then he's going to send his sons out trying to figure out how to invest in the technology, and set up a Bitcoin that is rooted in the market value of some of the key technologies. That's what he's going to do.
Yeah. Well, I guess the question would be from somebody who's more optimistic, and don't mistake me for someone who's more optimistic. And I mean, I
won't accuse you of that.
Yeah. But you could argue, well, they're not mutually exclusive, right? Like he could front run investments and stuff, and then also still actually release meaningful information. But you don't even think that's going to happen this administration?
I think he's going to be desperately trying to figure out how he can get personal advantage from the information, and he's going to try to get the people to provide him the information in his capacity as president. I think that his agency as president is going downhill fast. I think that a lot of the people, the general staff, actually the military staff, the intelligence community is now aware of the fact that he is incredibly dangerous to their own ambitions, and that they're aware of the model of Hitler, who was put into power by major financial interests here in the United States. There were Brown Brothers Harriman, that actually financed the construction of the international headquarters of the Third Reich.
Oh, really?
Yeah, wow. But he came off the leash, and did what he did, and they're concerned about that, about this with Trump. Trump's coming off the leash here.
We are finding ourselves embroiled in more and more conflicts.
With no plan adequate of how to get out of it. Not any clear objective that they really have in doing it, other than him exercising his ego and strutting his stuff. And he's now got the blood taste in his mouth of deploying the military and stuff. He's going to got Cuba in his sights next.
Well, the other possibility when it comes to the disclosure, conversation is that there's an orthogonal thing that occurs, right? A thing that is out of his control, out of our control, and it just makes itself known. And there's been speculation lately, obviously, we're on the precipice of a supposed revelation as forecasted by Chris Bledsoe and by, there's a lot of things, not just from them, percolating into the zeitgeist, claiming something's going to occur in 2026, 2027.
Yeah.
And
March.
Well, yeah,
March
that's one of the possibilities,
March 20th of 2026.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath for that
That's
one.
Chris, I'm not either.
Yeah.
The closer you get to each one of these prognostications, the lower the probabilities go. This is going to happen.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of prophecies come and go, of course, over the years in so many different permutations. But that aside, any specific prophecy or prognostication about things coming in the future, do you think that that's a real possibility, that whatever they are, they could just reveal themselves and take disclosure out of the hands of the government?
Very much so. I think that that's actually what one of the major concerns is on the part of the powers that be here, is that they want to try to stay, at least in their own mind, in control of the release of this information. They're extremely concerned that because of the irresponsible wielding of the threats of thermonuclear war, that this is increasing the probabilities that there could be an accidental nuclear exchange, and that they're convinced that the signals that have been being sent to them by the ETs, shutting down the missiles, disabling an entire aircraft carrier battle group out at sea at night, just shutting them completely down. All their propulsion gone, all their electric communications gone, all their lights gone, dead in the ocean in the middle of the night. The demonstration that they have that capacity to do this is sending chills throughout the entire intelligence community and the military. And that therefore what they're concerned about is losing their capacity to utilize the threat of initiating thermonuclear attacks against anyone. Because if they go and do that, actually, the ET people can intervene and shut off all the nuclear weapons on the planet all at once. And that would reveal their presence. And that would be their own term, catastrophic.
Yes. I mean, there's going to be inevitably a lot of people listening wondering, why does it need to come to that? Why don't they just do it? Why don't they just disable?
Well, let me tell you something. That was Lou and I, after we just come back from one of the meetings with the Inspector General in Washington, and we were sitting at this restaurant. It was closed. I think Lou knew who owned it, and we were just there, some of the couple of the staff people from ATIP. Yeah. Right. And one of the guys from ATIP was expressing real frustration over this whole process. Right. And he said, why is it that these beings don't just come down and make themselves present? And I said, well, there's a famous story about a young boy that loved butterflies. And he had this big collection of butterflies out in his backyard. He had this big gossamer tent where they all flew around inside. And he was looking for a sample of a monarch butterfly. And he finally found this cocoon for a monarch butterfly. And he brought it back home and he put it in this little box of cotton and put lights on it and kept it warm and kind of watched it and monitored it. And as the process unfolded, through the metamorphosis, this butterfly started breaking out of the cocoon. It was struggling against all the little silken threads and it was breaking out. And he got down to there being just one last silken thread. And he was struggling like mad, flapping his wings and pushing and shoving and pushing and shoving with his wings against this last little silken thread. And the little boy was becoming very sympathetic for this monarch butterfly. So he goes and gets a little pair of scissors and he clips the last silken thread. And the butterfly came free. And it was an absolutely perfect specimen of a monarch butterfly, except that it could never fly. Because as it turns out, the pressing against that last silken thread was absolutely essential to build the entire muscle structure for the butterfly to be able to fly on his own. That's the answer to your story, your question.
So it's about our own evolution and figuring it out for ourselves. That's what's of core importance to this, is that if we have the outside hand help us, then we cannot metamorphosize.
That's right.
Yeah. And it seems like you're getting emotional talking about this.
Yeah,
I'm curious what's driving that.
I mean, it is such a subtle insight.
Yeah, but a very important one.
such a magnanimous disposition toward us, to try to help us in that very subtle, important way, and not to fall prey to the temptation.
Yeah.
To jump in. And why didn't they stop us right with the first atomic explosion? Why did they let us drop these on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Yeah. Why did they let us do the things that we've been doing since July 16th of 1945? Why are they letting us do that? Because we're struggling. We're struggling against that last silken thread. Our own kind of disposition towards self-destruction.
Yeah.
And they don't want us out in the galaxy, bringing these nuclear weapons. They don't want us to be able to do this. And not only that, but they don't want us to totally destroy the capacity of our planet to gestate life. Our planet is one of the comparatively rare planets. There's obviously others because there's other species. But it's comparatively rare for a planet to be able to actually gestate life.
Yeah.
And so very, very clearly, we have tons of evidence that they're here. They're gathering flora and fauna in genetic material, including human genetic material, and they're obviously doing something with it, and it appears that possible that they are actually seeding life on other planets.
That's not where I thought you were going to go. I thought you were going to go the hybrid direction.
No, they're talking about seeding life on other planets that haven't yet developed the capacity to gestate life, but can sustain life, and will then become planets that are rich with life in the evolution of life. Okay, and a massive thermonuclear war on our planet will totally mutate the entire genetic pool of our planet. Okay, not just terminate the life of our particular species, and whatever it is that we can contribute, and they can see into the future. as you know, because they've been able to get outside of the matrix of time, of space-time.
Or at least it seems like they would have a better capacity of forecasting what could happen.
Except apparently that it's not perfect.
Yeah.
It's not perfect because there's a thing to even which they are subject, and that happens to be the infinite and eternal, the great mystery. You know, that the infinite and eternal sea of completely undifferentiated consciousness that abides out beyond the sum total of all the mass and energy, dark and regular mass.
The one.
It's the infinite and eternal consciousness that has enfolded into being the material universe and continues to manifest the material universe, which is the great mystery. And so that there is something beyond this psychic capacity to be able to directly and experientially engage this kind of electromagnetic phenomenon that bonds all these ultimately irreducible energies of matter together into this harmonic whole. There's an infinite and eternal consciousness that abides out beyond the sum total of all the mass and energy that makes up the universe. Okay? And that's the great mystery. And the ET people are subject even to this.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
And I hope that they're serving that and that they're trying to help us initiate ourselves into a higher awareness of that.
Oscar Wolf reached out to me on his deathbed. He was a clerk typist for the Project Blue Book. And he was a U.S. Army clerk typist and was assigned to the special unit in Project Blue Book that dealt with the 700 cases that they couldn't even conceivably explain away, because there were just too many people that had seen it, too many credible sources, too many photographs and everything. So they had a whole unit that was devoted to kind of looking into those particular cases. And he was the clerk typist. And they would bring the guys that were actually in the field doing the interviews that would come back and, take out the napkins and give them to him and their notes and stuff. And he would write up the reports. And he was there for a long time. And it went from like 1952 all the way to 67. He was there for the whole time, and he developed a really close relationship with the commander of the whole unit. And the commander was invited to go to S4.
Yeah.
And he brought Wolf with him, right? Oscar Wolf. He went with him because they were both part of the same religious community, this thing called the Worldwide Church of God, right? And so they go to Area 51. They got brought underground to S4. They were in S4, and they come to this place where this ET being is there, right? And he's being interviewed. He's perfectly cooperative, totally friendly, and he's in this room with this big two-way mirror, and Oscar can see him in there, and Oscar's afraid of him, thinks he's demonic.
What does he look? Is he supposed to look like a gray?
He's like 6 feet tall. He was a tall white.
Okay.
With the big head and the big eyes, but he's like almost 6 feet tall. And they had this like blue jumpsuit they had on him.
So the same as the Holloman incident, apparently.
Yes, very much so. His commander goes in to the room to have this telepathic exchange with him, and Oscar won't go in because he's afraid of him. Right? And so he stays outside, and it turns out that the guys that were there that were attending to the guy, they had been doing interviews with him, these telepathic interviews. And they had these card files of notes that they had taken from the interviews, right? And one of them, and they showed them to Oscar. So Oscar was sitting there, instead of going and seeing the being himself, he was sitting there kind of going through the cards. And one of the cards, the question they asked the ET guy, he said, who are you guys?
Yeah.
And what are you doing? Where do you come from? And he said that, I am part of a group of different individuals that come from different star systems here in our galaxy, in this galaxy. And we've been tasked to go around and monitor life as it's developing on different planets, and that's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing. And the follow-up question was like, "What do you mean you've been tasked? Like who tasked you to do this?" And he said, "Well, you people would refer to it as God, but it's very different than you think."
I really hate to drop the mic there, my friend, but I just got the text message from the owner of the studio saying we need to wrap up.
Okay.
But that revelation is a huge one, and I wish we could riff further on it. I know you talked to Chris Ramsey about this too, so if you're watching this and you want more of that story, check out the Area 52 episode after this one. But I really hope we get a chance to have additional conversations, my friend, because you're one of the most fascinating, brilliant human beings with one of the craziest histories of anybody on this planet. You've been involved in so many novel, pivotal moments in cultural history, and here you are on the precipice of another one again. So thank you so much for your time and just regaling me with all these awesome stories.
Thank you, Michael, for what you're doing. You know, this is how it'll happen. This is how it happens. Is regular people say, you know, if I get an opportunity to talk with lots of people, what is it I want to talk about?
Yeah.
How about something that's really meaningful? How about something that's the most meaningful thing you can possibly talk about?
Yeah.
And that's what this is.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
All right. We'll stop it there if you're watching. I don't know.
Whoever you are, the overlord.
Yeah.